No, I have. I know he's seen it. He should be coming down. Oh, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Good.
So Joey's gonna get back to them and have them come up with a new number. You know, what are the totals? Pardon me? How many miles total? Even if it comes down a couple bucks. Actually, when you look at the increases, they more focused. No, it's in my head. Oh. Oh, if you're going from 7 something to 5 something. 5 something to 8. So even if you cut the miles in half, you increase the price. 30% more. Yeah. So they're either going to change their mind or they might just tell us. Hey. Morning. Morning. Hey, Dan. I don't think it's going to get much. I don't think it's going to get that much. But we took the photos. More than a day little corner. No pictures. No pictures.
Yeah. Hi, Mike.
Morning. Oh, man. That's starting off kind of hard. Take it one just a pill. Wow. Yeah. What do they want to do?
They might leave it on.
Yeah, they moved on.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, we can set that up. Oh, wow. It's a shot at me. Yeah. Maxed out. That's a share.
That was, I was going to try to get something right. Yeah, yeah. Because I'm, because I'm,
Conversation. That's fine. We're done.
yeah, I agree with you. I thought the same thing. Yeah.
You should mention it to him. Goes that.
Yeah.
It was a clear decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning.
Everyone, we'll wait maybe 2 minutes, couple minutes here. Everybody settling in. Those on the WebEx, if we can wait a couple more minutes here. All right, everybody, we'll get started with the study session today. We have a presentation that everybody should have received their packet, I think online, and a physical packet as well. For reference, they'll show some slides here, but also you should have received your packet for the study session. So I'll pass it over to Jim Hilliard and Tyler Olson to start the presentation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members, for joining us today. We appreciate your time and look forward to sharing with you the preliminary FY 2023 budget. Tyler, if you can go to the agenda slide, please. Let me quickly introduce our agenda for today. We really have two objectives for our presentation to you today. The first, as in years past, will be a presentation of some context, some background for both our revenue and our budget. We think this is important so that folks who don't deal with the Valley Metro budget every day can kind of see how the pieces fit together and have a bit of that larger picture. In the second section of our presentation today, items 4 and 5, we'll actually walk you through first at a 10,000 foot level, then about at a 5,000 foot level, the actual budget requests for FY23 in both the RPTA and VMR operating budgets. And this section will be pretty different than what you've seen in the past. So in the past, we tended to sort of lead with kind of a verbal description of all the assumptions that went into the budget, this many revenue miles and that cost of fuel and this, that, and the other thing. And then when we provided you the data, we provided you the data in kind of an accounting format, meaning it was broken up by Valley Metro division and was in sort of the accounting line items like salaries versus consulting versus equipment. And so, that's a terrific way of capturing what's in the budget for the upcoming year so that we remain within those guardrails. But it's probably not the most useful format for you in terms of understanding what's changing between the 2 years' budgets and being able to make budget policy for Valley Metro. And so this year, we've changed that format pretty radically. And what we're providing you are the individual issues that get you from the FY22 budget that you adopted to the FY23 budget that we're requesting. And so the first thing that we'll do in the presentation of the budget is basically walk you through that format because we want to make sure we put a ton of time and effort into these materials. And we want to make sure that you guys are able to get the most out of them and know how to read them. Then the second thing we'll do is I'll then take you through first at 10,000, then at 5,000 feet. The changes that are most important in the RPTA and the VMR operating budgets. Then Tyler will pick up with a briefer review of the capital budget. So with only an hour in our meeting today and quite a bit of material to cover, we hope to be able to provide that larger context and to touch on the most important issues, but we're probably not going to have time to dive deep into any individual issue. Rest assured, we've got about 10 more of these meetings on schedule. I think there's 2 with you and 6 with various members of your staff over the next 2 months. And then, of course, we're always excited to dialogue with you individually on your questions. So we'll have lots of time to dive deep into each individual issue. And I think the way we've laid it out, hopefully, will make that a much more effective conversation than it has been in the past, because you won't have to play 20 questions with us. You can see what the issue is, how we came to the number that we came to. And I think that's going to allow us to have sort of better, deeper conversations from the get-go. But, you know, as I say, we probably won't have time to do a lot of deep dive on individual issues in today's meeting, unless this goes a whole lot faster than we were anticipating. So with that, I will hand it off to Tyler to take you through the revenue and expense backgrounds.
Good morning. We appreciate the opportunity to speak before the board and share this budget information with you. We did present the same information to your city staff and financial working group on Tuesday of this week, and definitely had some good feedback, and appreciate all their great input.
You might need to be a little louder.
Yeah, sorry. I'll lean in a little bit more here. Just to reiterate.
Hey, Tyler.
Yeah.
I think it's important for the whole board to know that the Audit and Finance Subcommittee has not seen this material and we are seeing this for the very first time as well. And it is our intent to have those deeper dive conversations in our meeting in April, May, and potentially June before the board sees it. But I think it's important because some people rely on AFS to know that we have not seen this yet either. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to reiterate, thanks again for allowing us to present this. We did present this to Financial Working Group on Tuesday this week, so your member city staff appreciate their input and look forward to going through the details with them some more. All right, so talking a little bit about the budget process, just a quick refresher on the overall process for those who may not know. Our budget cycle and timing is built with our members' process in mind. So similar to your process, we begin developing our budgets in early September. In October, we deliver a preliminary.
You're straight ahead.
Sorry, I trouble with the clicker.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, is this better?
Yes, that's better.
Excellent, thank you. I'll work on the better part, thank you. So delivering the preliminary transit service budget, really what your cities fund through the annual IGA process in October. We continue to refine those estimates in November through February, really updating that with the most detailed information we have as we move forward. And then coming to the board and through the committee process for information in March, April timeframe, and then finally again in May, June for the action. Talking about some of those working groups and committees. So financial working group is made up of your member cities, as mentioned. We dig into those details with that group, seeking additional info. Typically, they ask great questions. We have a Q&A. We do that with the preliminary budget. Several questions and answers that were sent out to the financial working group. The Audit and Finance Subcommittee provides oversight and additional eyes on the details, as Chair Stipp mentioned, of the AFS, making recommendations to the board as we move through the process. And then we typically have a budget study session, as we are today, for our board of directors to help understanding the budget, help assist them with any additional questions or info that they may need. So speaking of the preliminary budget that we delivered in October, it's really the starting point for the annual budget. We work with your member city staff to determine what service levels would you like to operate in your city. Really defining that, are there any new rail extensions opening up? What is the frequency of that? Really getting all of our assumptions together, determining what level of risk we have, developing a contingency around that risk. And the goal is really to provide a not to exceed amount to fit within your process as we refine the numbers throughout the year. Moving on to revenues. I don't know where this screen clicks, but apologize. All right, so major sources of funding. Prop 400, federal funds, fair revenues, the member city contributions that I mentioned. It's really through the annual IGA process. And jumping right into Prop 400 background. This is a half-cent sales tax approved for 20 years, beginning in January of 2005, sunsetting in December of 25. 33% of those revenues generated go to the Public Transportation Fund. Another 67% goes to the Regional Area Road Funds. What is key about Prop 400 is that for RPTA, it can be used for either operating or capital. It's fairly flexible. However, on Valley Metro Rail, it can be only used for capital activities or pre-capital activities. The allocations to each agency were determined by the board. Policy drafted in 2005 with almost 57% going to RPTA and the remainder to VMR. Taking a look at PTF revenue trends, this is the period July through February. Starting with the amounts at the left, you can see the 21 actuals followed by the 22 budget, and then the 22 actuals. The budget variance indicates that actual collections for this year thus far are 21% higher than planned. And the comparison of prior year 21 actuals at the far right there shows that we're also trending 20% higher than last year's actuals. So very good news there. Taking a look at the lifetime of the tax. This chart shows the cumulative 20-year forecast for each year. That's the green shading, starting with the original 2003 RTP plan at the far left. So based on that original plan, we were forecasting about $5 billion. 2006 forecast was even stronger. You can see that uptick there, and then you can see the impact of the Great Recession in years through 2010. So a big drop off there, about $2 billion that we lost right out of the first 5 years of that program. But as mentioned, things have been very optimistic since the pandemic, far better than planned. Really, what we forecasted, well, what ADOT forecasts, that's where we get our forecasts, is to the right there of that orange dotted line. We rely on their economic indicators and panel of economists to come up with that forecast each year. Taking a look at the PTF that's been programmed, this table shows the total forecasted revenue allocation by agency. You see both RPTA and VMR there. That first column is the revenue allocation. That's the $3 billion that I just mentioned on the previous slide. That's in the 20-year plan, the forecast and actuals. Really, the next column over shows what's been programmed. So we've got $2.8 billion programmed based on service levels and projects underway. We have $250 million basically that has not yet been programmed, that is waiting to be programmed.
Tyler, let me jump in for 1 second to underscore that. So, obviously a $250 million ETF surplus is a striking number, and the natural question is, what should we be doing with that? So ideally, we want to spend every dime possible on transit service because that's why we exist. However, that $250 million is really a one-time surplus related to the pandemic. So as you know, we received a couple $100 million in COVID relief funding from the federal government. That COVID relief funding was used to offset both city costs to a very large degree, but also PTF costs. So there's about 50 million of that balance that's directly related to the COVID relief funding. Secondly, for the first 2 years of the pandemic, we had fairly conservative budgets and very conservative spending at a time when, as you could see in the previous chart, PTF revenues were growing gangbusters. And so quite a lot of additional PTF revenue has accrued there. So the challenge, of course, in using sort of one-time savings for ongoing service is you create a structural shortfall, meaning once those one-time monies have been burned up, now you have to make a decision that either cities will pick up the additional cost of that service or you're going to have to cut service. And of course, after we spend the next 2 years convincing people to vote for Prop 400 so we don't have to cut service, cutting service is probably not something we really want to do. Therefore, there's going to obviously need to be some thoughtful work on how these surplus balances should be put to use. We believe that's something the board will want to engage with the new CEO on in the coming year. Therefore, this budget doesn't make any presumptions about that. So we felt like it was important to highlight its existence and the fact that we've got the next 2.5 years to figure out how we want to put it to use. But we don't make any presumptions in that regard here.
Thanks, Jim. All right, so moving on to local revenue trends and how they compare to our Prop 400 Public Transportation Fund at the far right. You can see that, although cities vary, some better than others as far as year-to-date performance over prior year actuals, they're all doing very well, which is a good sign.
Tyler, one more thing I guess I want to point out here. So I've been doing big agency budgets since the early 90s. And most budgets in most years are kind of incremental. So you can look at the individual ups and downs, whether it's on the revenue side or the expenditure side, and focus there and do just fine. Like, this is not one of those budgets. Probably for the greatest extent since the Great Recession, like, this is a budget where you really have to look at the revenue and expenditure side together, or it becomes misleading. And what I mean by that is, if you were to just look at this slide in isolation, like, you would say, holy mackerel, that's like 3 times the revenue growth that you typically see for your cities and we typically see in a normal year for PTF. Like, we're rolling in the money, happy days are here again, right? At the same time, in a couple minutes, I'm going to be sharing with you the expenditure side of the ledger. And if you saw that just in isolation, you would say, oh my gosh, like, we can't possibly afford these inflationary increases. This is nuts, we're broke. Okay, but because these things are both moving up together, like, neither of those things are true, right? So you have the expenditure side going up driven by inflation, but you also have the revenue side going up driven by inflation, which kind of makes sense because, of course, sales tax monies come from the sales tax on the prices of goods sold. As the price of those goods goes up, the collection of those taxes go up. And of course, the same wage pressures that are impacting your city budgets and are impacting our budget are also allowing people to continue to buy goods at those higher prices, right? So the very same factor that's driving up the expenditure side of the ledger is driving up the revenue side of the ledger. And as a result, this budget's in balance, right? Because it maintains the balance between those two. We're not getting richer, we're not getting poorer. It's basically a push over the 2 years. And so it's really important to kind of keep that in mind, because again, were you to look at either one of these two in isolation, you might draw a conclusion that there were some dramatic things going on, but because those dramatic things are happening in tandem, you know, we're staying in balance across the budget.
All right, so taking a look at bus revenue trends. If you remember, we moved back to front door boardings in October. The impact has been very positive. It's good signs. The year-to-date cumulative budget here is represented in the green graph. Purple indicates the respective actual collections year-to-date, and the orange line represents the monthly collection. So you can see the spike there as we move past October. Slight downturn for January, but I think that will stabilize. And based on the current prices for fuel, I'm seeing a lot more people on my bus personally, and I think this is just a good sign that a lot of folks are getting back on transit to save some money too. So we're hopeful that, based on these projections, very optimistic that we will reach $3 million in revenues this year. Moving on to light rail. Same view as the previous chart. Again, we moved to the full fare inspection process in October as well. Very positive results. We've already exceeded the year-to-date 22 budget so far on light rail. We're confident that we'll see, $5 million by the end of the year. All right, so any questions on revenues before I move into the budget expense background? Okay. Our operating budget is composed of 2 main categories. We have transit services. These are the direct costs of operating and maintaining transit services that your cities purchase, and then support services, really all the indirect costs that support the operating budget. I'll share some additional details on those in the coming slides. So transit services that are included in our budget, RPTA operates bus service, demand service, that's both paratransit and ride choice programs, and van pool service, while Valley Metro Rail operates a rail program. So that's light rail and soon to be streetcar, which we're excited about next month. So bus and rail service are really the largest services that we put out, and service levels are determined by your member cities. Demand service is required within a quarter mile of fixed route service, so of rail and bus service. And van pool is 100% funded by the participants, the customers that want to get together and set up a van pool. They pay for 100% of that cost. So no member city funds impacted by van pool. Moving on to support services. These are the services that indirectly support what we do, whether that is focused on transit service, agency business operations, or other services on behalf of your cities. These services include the regional call center that takes all of the customer calls, whether that's kudos, complaints in the entire region. Mobility Service Center, they provide the certification for ADA passengers that want to move throughout the system, or those requesting the reduced fare ID. Certification for ADA passengers, essential training on how to ride our system for those who may need some help. Included in that also is marketing, communications, community outreach, planning. We assist member cities with, service change requests, service modeling. If city has an interest in, the impact of what that would do, they look at those metrics, really essentially support that process on behalf of your cities. We also provide the system and corridor planning for future light rail extensions and the preliminary engineering that is required prior to moving into capital construction phase, particularly for VMR projects. Commute Solutions offers marketing and promotion of alternative transportation modes. Administration and finance is really everything else for internal support services for business. Moving on to the operating budget. So taking a look at the sources of funds for each area, starting with RPTA. Transit services on the left side are funded primarily with public transportation funds and member city funds, so that's 91% of that makeup. Support services at the right are funded primarily with public transportation funds, regional area road funds, making up 93%, and some other funds in both categories. Key takeaway here is that support services for RPTA are not funded by member cities. RPTA sources and uses, looking at the 23 operating budget, these amounts include the inflationary items, obligations, and recommendations that Jim will discuss shortly. The sources of funds are programmed at $193 million. You can see that large increases in the use of public transportation funds and transit service agreements, also your member city contributions, are up. This is due to the fact that we're essentially out of federal COVID relief money on RPTA. Your city's asked us to draw those down to fund as fast as possible. So we're basically now moving back to the normal member city contributions for the services that you purchase, along with any shortfalls in fair revenue based on current ridership levels. Moving on to Valley Metro Rail. Transit services are funded primarily by member city. As I mentioned earlier, we can't use PTF for transit service funding. So FY23 still has $33 million in COVID relief remaining. It's important to note that federal funds are typically less than 10% of the sources for transit services. So in a normal year, pre-pandemic, without this federal money, this relief money, the member city contributions would be much higher. The reason we have some money left on Valley Metro Rail for relief funding is really just due to some of our contracts not having federal terms and conditions that are required to draw those funds down. So we have to stay compliant with the guidelines by FTA. Support services at the right are funded by member city. Public transportation funds can be used for pre-capital activities related to light rail expansion. So that's really that pre-engineering work, design work related to those future expansions. Taking a look at total sources and uses, you can see that there's additional COVID relief money, almost $14.5 million, almost making up the largest amount of increase in sources. Fair revenues are up, and member city contributions are up just slightly. And so, yeah, $19 million. Again, these have the initiatives that Jim is going to speak of shortly.
Okay, I will take it from here through the rest of the VMR and RPTA operating budgets. So I'll do three things with you in this section. The first is to talk about how we've updated the presentation format that you're seeing today, and then why we've done that, and then how to get the most out of those materials. Then I'll get into sort of a 10,000-foot view of what's the overall RPTA and overall VMR operating budgets look like, and then a 5,000-foot view of what are the major issues that are driving the changes in this year's budget. So we'll work in sort of increasing detail as we go. So initially, I mentioned at the top that we've created this new issues and recommendations document for you. This is a supplement to the regular budget document that we provided in years past. It's a more accounting layout. But as I said, I think we felt like that accounting layout, while terrific for us as end users, wasn't as user-friendly for you as it needed to be. It was almost impossible to be able to see what are the specific issues that are causing changes between FY22 and the FY23 recommendation. And so that's what the issues and recommendations document you have does, is it takes you individually through those issues, first in a brief paragraph summary, and then in more detail of what's changing between the years, why it's changing, how we arrived at the numbers that we're presenting to you. The second thing we wanted to do was to provide more clarity in how those changes were impacting your city budgets. So the accounting, as Tyler's talked about, most of our functions are a mix of funding from different areas. And so when you look at that from the accounting view, it's a little hard to tell, like what's impacting my city and what's not. And so we've created an additional table that you're going to see in a minute that's designed to highlight that, so it's really clear how changes are impacting your city budget. Okay, so with that, let me spend just a minute walking you through how to read the new document. So the new document involves a little bit of new verbiage. So to quickly explain that, we start with the base budget. The notion of the base budget is Tyler and I just spent the last 4 months meeting with each of our divisions and going through their operating budgets in great detail. What did you have last year? What are you spending? What's changed? And we were doing that looking for places that we could find efficiencies and places that we could find reductions. As you'll see in a minute, we found about $3 million of those reductions. It's about a 5% reduction in overall support services costs as part of that exercise. So what the base budget reflects is if we assume the same service levels we had in fiscal 22, in the year the budget's already passed, and then we incorporated the reductions that we have found as the first step in the 23 budget process, what would that look like? Right? So that's our starting point. To that starting point, we then have to add 2 categories of what are essentially non-discretionary costs, and those are inflation and ridership changes, price of fuel, increases in the number of paratransit riders, and then next, what we're calling continuing commitments. So continuing commitments are essentially, for example, we have a contract to provide bus service, and that contract says every year the cost per revenue mile goes up by 2.2%. Okay, so when the new year comes, the cost per revenue mile goes up by 2.2% because that's what the contract requires. So that's one sort of continuing commitment. Another sort of continuing commitment, and maybe one of the biggest ones you'll see in this year's budget, are implementations of things the board has previously approved, like, for example, the new fare collection system. So I think most of you know we're in the process of implementing new mobile ticketing, new validators, new TVMs. Most of those things are starting to really go out of design phase and into installation this year. And so we have to include the costs of implementing those previously approved initiatives. So we have those 2 things where we've really tried to keep them essentially non-discretionary. We still provide detailed write-ups on those because, of course, we should have a conversation about what assumptions are we making about the price of fuel. But at the end of the day, we're going to buy fuel because we run buses. The third category is Valley Metro recommendations. And so there we've put everything that is essentially, it's discretionary. It's your making budget policy for Valley Metro. And so we wanted to separate those 3 out so that they were really clear as you looked at this comprehensive list of changes, which ones were very policy oriented in the hopes that we could spend, a good discussion and really drilling into those so you can make the most informed decisions on those. Okay, so that's the concept behind the 3 categories. Let me quickly show you how that looks in table form. I'm not going to dive into what this table is telling us just yet. I'll do that in a second. I just want to first kind of orient you to the table itself. So first of all, you'll notice that there's 3 different sections vertically. The top section is, and this happens to be the RPTA budget, the top section is all funding sources. It shows you total changes for the year, regardless of where the money is coming from. The middle section are just the things that are city funded, so that you have a really clear view of how changes are impacting your city budgets. And then the bottom tier is basically everything else. It's federal dollars, it's PTF, et cetera, right? So looking at the columns themselves, you start out on the left hand with the fiscal 22 approved budget. Then the next column over is the fiscal 23 base. That's where the funding, the cost reductions that I mentioned are incorporated. You then see a change column that just subtracts those 2 from the other, so you can see the impact of those differences. And then we get into the two categories of obligations I mentioned, inflation and ridership and continuing commitments. The column next over there is simply the sum of those two, right? So you can see that the total amount of essentially non-discretionary changes. And then next to that are volumetric recommendations, and those are those discretionary policy-oriented changes that we recommend for this year's budget. Lastly, you've got a total, and then you've got a total change column, so you can see what the total impact is, in all funds, in city funds, and then in sort of everything else, right? So what we're trying to do here, once again, is help you see how the pieces fit together across those three categories of changes, and then specifically how they impact your city funds versus how they impact, federal dollars and everything else. Now, that's captured in narrative form in two different sections of your document. The first section of the document is the change summaries. And so that has three different sections. There's an RPTA only section, an RPTA and VMR section for costs to changes that impact both. And then at the very end, there's a volumetric rail only section, right? So each individual change is in one of those three sections, depending on which agency it affects. All right, the second thing you'll notice is we've color-coded the three different categories to make them easy to identify. So things that are non-discretionary, inflation-oriented, we've colored those green so they stand out. It's green like money, right? Things that are continuing commitments, we've colored blue because blue is always here to remind us of our continuing commitments. Okay, so then lastly, the things that are volumetric recommendations, those we've left in a plain black font. It's black and white, it's just a fax mail. So you'll also notice in this last example, this is a change that comes out of the joint costs section of the report. And the way you can tell that is the two numbers that I've just highlighted there. You have a number with an R behind it, that's the RPTA cost, and a number with a V behind it, that's the Valley Metro Rail cost, right? So you can see how this joint issue impacts the two different agencies' budgets separately. The other thing you'll notice in each of these summaries is at the very bottom, there's a number on a gray background. That number is the change number. And so, first of all, I think it'll make it a little bit easier for us to dialogue on the changes we're talking about, because instead of having to page the document looking for that particular title, you can just say it's number 18, and sequentially it's the 18th issue, right? So it makes them a little faster to find in this document. Maybe even more importantly, for every single change in the budget, there is also a detailed change sheet that walks through, okay, why is this happening? How did you arrive at the numbers that you arrived at? And then breaks down the costs at the bottom by category. And if it's for Valley Metro Rail and RPTA, then you also see the breakouts by the agency there, right? And so the intent of the summary is to give you a quick look at, okay, is this something I want to know more about? And if it is, then you can use the change number to go to that detailed sheet in the second part of your section to see specifically what is this about and how did you get to that number, okay? So let me pause there for a second. That's sort of how you read the new presentation format. I want to stress we're still putting together the old style budget book. We just thought this was going to be a much more productive way to give you guys, I mean, really perfect transparency between how'd you start in 22 to get to 23 and what are all the moving pieces that get you there. We wanted you to be able to see that individual detail and then to sort of give you the ability to see a more detailed description of each issue without sort of overwhelming you in the summary document. So the summary document is a quick sort of, here's what's going on and here's the amount. And then if that's something you want to know more about, there's your drill down for additional information. Now, I will say, I got to give a lot of kudos to Tyler and his team because our accounting system isn't set up to do any of this. Our accounting system is set up to track things on a category basis like salaries or benefits or equipment. It doesn't do it on an issue basis. And so we've spent the last probably 4 months working through this in tremendous detail, basically with a bunch of spreadsheets, trying to keep everything straight. And so it's been a huge amount of work. We hope that you find it really useful. We're looking forward to your feedback because, of course, this, like everything we do, should be improved year after year after year. And so if there's better ways to do it, we want to do that. If you'd rather we don't do it, we would love to not do it because it's a huge amount of work, but we thought it was serving you better. I do have to say, because we were trying to cram through a ton of detail in the same amount of time, a ton more detail in the same amount of time we always have for the budget process, we were working nights and weekends for weeks, and as a result, there's some stuff that got missed. Like I've noticed a couple places in the narrative where we intended to fill in more information and didn't, or where there was a copy and paste error. And so there are There are some errors in your packet that have been corrected in what is now posted on the website. As we continue to find either corrections or improvements. So for example, I'd like to provide you a little more information on what's changing in the price of fuel because it's so significant, but we didn't have time to get all that into the detailed sheet. We're going to continue to update those so that the product that you see in April should be even stronger than what you have today. So, okay. Let me pause for just a second and see if there's any questions on how to use the material. And then if there aren't, I'll jump into that 10,000-foot view of each of the budgets, what's changing and why.
If I could say one thing, Councilmember Stipp and I had a conversation many weeks ago, and a lot of it went into how we presented the budget this year. And I remember Councilmember Stipp at that time, one of the reasons I talked to him as chair of the AFS is we had talked about these inflationary and these other challenges that we have going up. And he made a request that we split those out so that we can readily identify those things. That led to the discussion with Jim and Tyler and finding out they were already moving in that direction. And so what we did is we said, what if we not only split that out, but we provide more detail so you can make a decision based on here's what we call base or normal. Not that it's not important, but here are the things that truly are policy driven or are market and world driven. And so Councilman said, this is really an expansion of what you and I had talked about in an attempt to give you more information and narrow down, whereas before we'd have to sort of pluck those out of totals. We're trying to provide more detail so you can focus in on those things that are truly either non-discretionary, discretionary, or, hey, we need to make a change because we can't adapt and focus in on those as opposed to try and pluck them out from the overall total. So I'd like to give Tyler and Jim a lot of credit because they got very creative. They took the charge of trying to provide you more and better information. As Jim said, we did this in the hopes of accomplishing something. We certainly appreciate your feedback as to whether we've hit the mark or not. If we've made it more confusing, then I'm sorry, but I think that we've tried to identify those points that you can then focus in on. And I'll tell you, Jim and Tyler, their teams have just done an amazing job in putting this together. So that's it.
Oh, thanks, Scott. Okay, so let's get into, I'm sorry, sure.
You mentioned this coming back to the board in April.
For discussion.
What's the intent of April? And the reason that I'm asking that question is AFS is going to get its first look at this on April 7th, and then 2 weeks later is going to be the board meeting. I'm wondering if we don't allow the AFS comments and all that to percolate through, come back to the board in May with that next wave. That way, if cities, because they're getting this information today, the staff just got it on Tuesday. What I understand was an abbreviated financial working group. You guys weren't able to get all the way through.
Actually, they saw exactly what you're seeing today, the entire bit.
But I don't think the financial working group felt entirely comfortable being able to dive into anything. So I think they're still digesting that information. That's kind of where I'm driving at. And I think the board today is digesting the new format, et cetera. AFS is going to get this, and we're going to do our digestion as well. I'm just wondering if would we be better served in letting AFS and the staff do their stuff throughout the month of April, get feedback from all of the member cities, either through financial working group or let them contact AFS folks, and then we come back in May back to the board with, okay, this is where we ended up. I don't know if that perhaps wouldn't be more efficient. I guess I'd just find out what everybody else seems to think, but right now this is day one of a new format, so.
You bet. I mean, certainly, as I mentioned at the top, we recognize that an hour wasn't going to be sufficient to dive deeply into any of the major issues, that we'd really be able to just sort of orient you to what are the big changes, how do you use the document, recognizing that in the subsequent meetings, we'd be having those detailed discussions, both with AFS, with the board, with the staff, the financial working group, et cetera, with the managers at TMC, RMC. I think we certainly stand ready to adapt the process at the chairman and the board's direction overall. I think, when we had originally conceived of this year's budget cycle, we had hoped to be able to bring some of this material to the board in February, so the board would have sort of more time to consider and to give us feedback. And then, of course, the inflation blew up and the labor markets blew up, and we really felt like it was going to be a better discussion with less unknowns if we pushed it back out to our normal March. And so I think the one challenge maybe with not going through the regular board cycle in April is then your managers at TMC, RMC, and the board members that aren't on AFS only get basically one crack at this, which is May, unless we end up pushing to June. And of course, by June, your back's kind of against the wall because we got to have a budget or checks start to bounce. So certainly we stand ready to go in whatever direction the chairman would like to take us. But we kind of have a bias for the more times we can get in front of all of you to answer your questions, the better. And if there's some things that AFS has brought up that we haven't fully incorporated yet, we can just make that clear, that the AFS has raised this and we're still baking it in, so FYI.
Chair. I understand that we're up against the June deadline because I'm probably one of the leads at City of Phoenix that has delayed a budget and has voted down a budget. So very clear on that process, but also knew when I voted on not passing the budget, I still had another week in July to come back and be able to vote for the budget to get the items that were needed or what was being negotiated at the time. So I understand the timeline and the, I guess, push-pull-me tension that goes on with board and I'm going to say employees or staff in trying to make that happen, because in all reality, all of us have the pressure to get it done. But I do feel that if we can add in some other pieces or buffers so that then we can meet that deadline, but be able to have a really deliberative conversation on this. I'm new in this process, so this is a huge learning curve that I'm having at this moment. And you also changed the process, which is good because it's new to me. Maybe easier for me to pick up, but I also, staff had concerns, and they reached out to me this morning and saying, hey, we have some concerns. And I want to be able to have those conversations with staff and everything else. And so all our lives are fast and furious, but I feel like we need to at least slow some of the process down and still be able to meet the deadline. So that's what I'm hearing.
And Vice Mayor, we've got a slide here at the end that summarizes this, but we couldn't agree more. We think this needs to be a deliberative process, and that was part of why we changed the format to help make the decision points more clear than I think maybe they have been in the past. So as it stands now, there would be 2 full board meetings in addition to this, April and May, and then possibly June should the board opt to do that. So 2 to 3 full board meetings. You'd have 2 to 3 AFS meetings, which involve some members of the board. And then just between now and June, I think there's 6 different opportunities with staff. And so if we need to add in June, if we need to add in additional meetings, we are at your service and are happy to do so. We're also more than happy to work with each city individually on specific questions that come up.
Yeah, I prefer as a collective. I'm a collaborator. Most Latino families are collaborators and come together and really meet as a family. So I think you can answer individual cities, but as a group, we vote as a block or as a group. And I think it's important for all our questions to be out in the forefront and understand what other cities are asking and struggling with even. And so I'd rather have it open, but so I don't know. It's up to all of us. So is there a recommendation, or we just want to say, let's add that buffer, and if we need it, we need it, or if we don't, we don't, and then we can just remove it from our calendar, which is nice.
I think what you're saying, Jim, there is a potential June buffer that we can go into. From now to May, you're saying 6 potential meetings with staff, and then there's 2 for the full board, and then 2 or 3 with audit and finance, right?
Yeah,
I
correct.
think,
Two.
or 2. I think that,
And the April meeting was not meant to be a decision meeting. It was
Yeah,
like,
sure.
take it, process it,
Yeah.
come back, throw it on the table for discussion and follow up and things like that.
and I think if we're running into towards the end and we need more time, I think there's room, right? So I think, I think, I think we hear the folks' concern as far as making sure, we process this new format. I think it's clear, being on the board the last several years, it's a lot more clear like visually as far as the numbers and how it's conveyed. So, but I would just say it also has to work for you all as staff. I think that's going to be an important aspect to how this moves forward, is how you identify those challenges and those successes, and how do we create a process that works for the board, but also staff to increase, efficiencies and productivity and everything that goes into a budget, right? So I think we have a Councilmember Tomachoff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Tyler and Jim for putting the effort into trying to make, easier for us to understand. Although, I mean, it is still something new that we're going to have to, get used to. And I just want to put it out there, at least for me, I don't see any scenario where we're going to be able to wrap this up at the May board meeting. Keeping in mind that all of us, all 19 member cities have and then the county as well. We have, this is a side gig for us. We've got city budgets and this is a really busy time of the year. So in order to actually have time to go through and find areas where we may have questions, I mean, I don't see the June AFS meeting on here, but I imagine we're probably going to need it. So for me anyway, I would say, to put it out there and see if the rest of the board agrees with me, is that I would like staff to be planning on wrapping this up in June rather than May, because if we can finish early, great. But I honestly, with my workload right now, and I know a lot of us have a lot going on, especially this time of the year, it's a lot to get through. So I just don't think we're going to be able to vote on this budget on May 19th. Honestly, I don't see that as a possibility. Thank you.
Through the chair.
Thank you. We got Mayor Harkey and then Councilwoman Janet.
Yeah, I assume you guys like me. I mean, I have a transportation staff that is keyed in and will be part of this. And I mean, I lean heavily upon their expertise and I interface with them before every one of our regular meetings. So I'm fine with our current schedule and if we need to add it, but I expect my staff to also be engaged in those ancillary meetings that were described, as they are every month, that are looking at our city's priorities and the overall system. So I'm honestly fine with let's add it if we need it and keep the schedule as we are. But I don't know if I'm in the majority or minority at this point. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just circle back, I think I was speaking more as a member of AFS probably, because AFS expectation is that we do a deep dive. So maybe that's kind of what my perspective was, Mayor Harkey.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Janet.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the way you presented the material with the color coding. As you know, I'm new to the board and I did spend quite a bit of time going through it, and it made it much easier to understand what's going on. Now, again, is how I feel concerning the timeline. I kind of agree with Lauren. I would put it in June. It's fairly technical and I don't think it's anything that should be rushed. And then if we don't need June, pull it out. But I'd rather see the meeting there with an expectation that June will be the wrap up, rather than trying to get it through in May. Thank you.
Okay. So I think direction on timeline, right? Plan for June. And then if we end up early, that's good. If it's June, it's good too, right? So, okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right.
Well, appreciate all the comments and look forward to your continued feedback as we go through. Okay, so let me start with a sort of 100,000-foot view, maybe a 10,000-foot view of the RPTA budget. There's several themes here I want to make sure are captured are clearly overall before we start to get into the individual issues. So going back to this chart, which again is all funds on the top and city funds in the middle. So the first thing I'll point out is the base change that we've already mentioned. So you see in that third column over, we're starting out this budget by proactively implementing a $2.7 million reduction in our costs. We didn't include the detail of each and every one of those in your summary document because it would have been 47 pages long, because it was literally going through every line item with every division. But I can give you kind of a flavor of it. It's a 41% reduction in all the travel in our budget. It's a 79% reduction in the replacement of non-revenue fleet vehicles year over year. It's a 45% reduction in building maintenance. It's a 1/3 reduction in PC and laptop purchases. It's a 100% reduction in furniture. We ain't buying no new furniture this year. Sorry, new CEO, you'll have to sit on the floor. No, that's absolutely not true. It's an 18% reduction in office expenses. So we made a wide range of cuts, but they were $100 here and $1,000 there across the entire agency. But those nickel and dimes add up to the 2.7 million that you see there. So that's the good news. The other thing that you see in the base columns there to the left, going down to the city funded level, is in spite of a $2.7 million reduction, you'll see that the city costs are going up $6.6 million on the base budget. Why is that? That's because, as Tyler mentioned, we've burned up our COVID relief funding. So in FY20, in a normal year, city funds make up between 27 and 30% of the RPTA budget. In FY22, it was 23%, and that was because we had the COVID relief monies that were buying those down. So those are now exhausted, so you have to go back to a normal kind of 27% funding level. And so you're seeing city costs go up in spite of the reduction in overall spending because we've simply lost that funding source. Okay, so that's where we started. Where did we end? And so for that, I'd ask you to go out and look at the far right-hand column where you see total change, and we'll start at the top showing all funds. And what you see there is an eye-popping $26.4 million year-over-year increase in total expenditures. Holy moly. Okay, so where does that come from? Let's go back to the middle of the chart and I'll walk you through it. So under obligations, our first category of inflation and ridership, that's $17 million of that change. And in a minute, I'll take into the individual issues that make that up, but there are things like fuel costs, et cetera. The return of paratransit riders to ridership that didn't ride during the pandemic. And so we'll take you through each of those. We'll take you to the top ones in some detail, and you'll be able to see every single one listed out in the next slide that I share with you. So the next column over are continuing commitments, $6.7 million. Once again, those are things like contractually required revenue mile rate increases in bus contracts or implementing the fare collection system, et cetera. So those are continuation of things that are prior approved by the board and essentially out of our control. Okay, so you'll notice of those two, $23.7 million. So of that 26 million, not counting the $2.7 million in cuts, 23 million of them are essentially non-discretionary. Okay, so the last column, volumetric recommendations, is $5.4 million. In a minute, I'm going to drill into that a little bit. Again, those are discretionary changes that really reflect the board's policymaking, financial policymaking for Valley Metro. So we wanted to give those a lot of prominence so that they were clear to you and an important part of our dialogue. But as I'll show you in a minute, many of those are in fact inflation driven as well. They're simply inflationary issues that we get to make decisions on as opposed to the price of gas where it's going to be what it's going to be. The other thing I'll highlight on this chart that Tyler already mentioned is if you go down to the city funded section, you'll notice that there are no numbers for support services for RPTA. And so as Tyler mentioned, that's because RPTA support services are entirely funded by PTF. You don't pay for any of them. Okay? And that's a good thing because it doesn't impact your budgets, as you'll see in just a minute. The allocation of costs between the two agencies can be a little bit confusing. So what I mean by that is we're seeing $2.7 million in reductions here, about 900,000 of those being support services. In a minute, when I get to Valley Metro Rail, you'll see another $1 million of support service reductions. we don't have an HR shop for Valley Metro Rail and an HR shop for RPTA, right? We have an HR shop. And so when we cut HR costs, those cost changes get allocated between the two agencies by basically an accounting formula. It's kind of like a big pie chart, and it looks at the total salary spending for each agency, and then it allocates either costs or savings proportionally. Okay, so you'll see different amounts of reductions, especially in support services, between RPTA and VMR, and that's not a choice we make. It's just a function of that, the way that formula allocates costs. We look at it holistically. Okay, so let me take you into a little bit of detail in each of these major categories so you get a flavor of what's driving that $26.4 million total change. Okay, so this tricolored chart is using the same color coding that's in the summary document with our non-discretionary inflation in blue, our non-discretionary continuing commitments, in green, continuing commitments in blue, and then Valley Metro recommendations in black. And before I start to touch on some of the major issues here, I guess there's two things I'll point out. First, very quickly, mathematically, you'll see that all three of these categories sum 29 million, and yet I just told you there was a $26 million increase. Well, that's because we have the $2.7 million in savings that are net of that, right? So this doesn't show the savings, just the increases. Okay, an important thing to note is I've been describing the Valley Metro recommendations as sort of discretionary changes between the 2 years, and that's absolutely true. However, there are two of the biggest there that are also inflationary changes. They're just inflationary changes that are discretionary. So what I mean by that is, and I'll talk in more detail about these in just a minute, but the operations contingency recommendation essentially reflects the impact of the current increases in labor rates that we're seeing on our contracts over the next year. Okay. The Valley Metro staff labor market reflects the impact of changes in labor rates on our staff salaries over the next year. So unlike gas prices, we get to make a decision on how we want to approach those things. So we put them in this category to make sure that they were highlighted, but they are in fact just inflation, like the other forms of inflation we're seeing in this budget. Okay, so recognizing that, come on. The truly discretionary spending in this budget is actually $950,000, right? When you net out the mandatory inflation, the continuing changes, and the inflation-driven, those two inflation-driven items I've changed, the total that is truly discretionary out of that 29 million is $950,000. So the total VMR, the total RPTA budget is about $167 million. So excluding inflation and continuing commitments, the total discretionary request in this budget is 0.5%. So I never thought I would call a budget that has a $26 million change a conservative budget, but this is a really conservative budget because the parts that we control, we're only asking for a 0.5% increase. And that's before you take into account that we just cut $2.7 million from the start. So if you didn't have all this inflation in the budget, this budget would be going down by almost $2 million. So that's a really key takeaway. The big numbers can mask the fact that we're working really hard to hold costs down. Okay, so let me jump into these individual issues for just a second to give you a flavor of them. And as I say, each of these has a detail sheet in your half of your packet. So in the inflation and market category, the top two. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. I hope this is better. Sorry about that. Being loud enough is not usually my problem. Okay, in the inflation and ridership category, the top two that you see there, the top three, City of Phoenix Regional Services, ADA, paratransit, and bus fuel costs, those are 97% of that $17 million change. So let me tell you just a little bit about each of them, and as I say, we'll have opportunities to dive more deeply into them in subsequent meetings. So City of Phoenix Regional Services, as you may know, City of Phoenix provides a number of bus routes to the region as a whole. They also provide some paratransit service to the region as a whole. They provide some technical services like HASTIS, the system that's used to schedule bus trips, CAD AVL, the system that's used to locate buses in real time and communicate. And so the region pays City of Phoenix for those services. And that's what's reflected in that line. Now, that's a much bigger bump than we typically see year over year for that, but that's because Phoenix, just like Valley Metro, used its COVID relief money to buy down the cost of transit services, which means last year, Valley Metro was charged less for these services because they were taking the COVID relief off the top, and now the COVID relief is run out for them as well. So you're seeing a bigger change than usual here, just reflecting the need to backfill the lost COVID relief funds. ADA paratransit and ride choice. So what is reflected here is primarily the cost of fuel inflation for that service and, more importantly, the return of ridership. So when the pandemic hit, paratransit ridership dropped about 60%. It's now come back to the point where it's about 40% below pre-pandemic levels. So that $3.5 million assumes that paratransit ridership will go back to its pre-pandemic levels. Will it? Nobody knows, but I think probably not. All right, so we're going to be working with your staff. This is in effect a worst case scenario number for that, because it assumes all the ridership comes back. And in the next weeks and months, we'll be meeting individually with your transit staff to talk to them about how much does your city want to assume paratransit and ride choice ridership comes back. And whatever decision they make, that's the number that we'll put in. Right? So it won't get worse than this. It'll probably get better as those get revised down. The art and the science of this is obviously we pay for the riders that actually show up. So if we assume in the budget that ridership is going to grow less, and then it grows more, you're still on the hook for more, and you've got to come up with that money in the middle of your budget year. So it sort of pays to be a little bit cautious in estimating this ridership, because we don't charge you for what we don't use, but you got to pay for what you do. Okay, next are bus fuel costs. Just at a high level, that's about a 56% increase in the cost of fuel year over year. It varies by yard. We have 3 different yards. It's a little bit lower in the West Valley. It's quite a bit higher in Tempe, like 70%, and it's about that 50% in Mesa. And so those are the costs that the fuel providers at those locations are estimating based on the number of revenue miles that we're anticipating for both CNG and diesel. It's significant. Okay, in the continuing commitment category, you've really got 3 big ones there. The top 3, they're 89% of that $6.7 million. The new fare collection system is simply the continued implementation of that system. There's kind of 2 major parts of that this year. One is actually buying the fare media cards that people will use, the smart cards. We buy the stock initially, and then people purchase them back from us. So that'll pay for itself over time as people buy their cards. But we gotta buy them up front, and we gotta buy them now because of the chip shortage. The second part of that is setting up the customer support call center that's going to be supporting that. The board last year approved us contracting with VIX to staff that call center, but to save facility costs, we're actually setting it up and equipping it, and then they're just bringing in the staff on the back end, so we're not getting charged their corporate markup on things that are essentially tables and desks and square footage. So you have the one-time setup of that associated with the fare collection system. Next are bus service and contract rates. So there's 2 different pieces going on here. One is your staff has brought to you in the board process through the service planning working group changes in the number of revenue miles that are being driven in each region. And so then those new revenue miles that are either being added in 23 or were added on a partial year basis in 22 and now need to be funded on a full year basis, there's that. Okay, the other thing that's in here is those contracts include, as part of the contract that you've approved, these modest inflationary increases. So in the East Valley bus contract, for example, rates go up 2.2% per revenue mile per year. And that was, when they bid that contract a couple of years ago, what people thought normal inflation looked like, which in a minute we'll get into in some of these other issues. Okay, so lastly, you have the paratransit and ride choice combined scheduling center. So the board has approved us contracting to combine the scheduling and reservations for paratransit and ride choice as a way of eliminating administrative duplication. As you'll hear in the May board memo, we actually have had to delay implementing that a year because of the crazy labor market that we're in. The vendors that we were hoping on bid on that, frankly, didn't bid because they were afraid they couldn't staff it. So we're kicking that out a year. But even because we're kicking it out a year, at the end of 23, we still have to buy the computers and desks in order to staff that. So the vendor brings in the people, and then we bring in the hardware, and that way we're not paying twice for the hardware. And so that's the one-time setup of that scheduling center. Okay, lastly, probably the 2 most important issues I'll talk about today. The operations contingency there at the top for $3.6 million. So we have a number of contracts that were bid in prior years, like the bus contract that I just mentioned, that assumed inflation would be 2%. And inflation ain't 2%, and it's especially not 2% in the labor market right now because the labor market's exploding. Okay, and so those contracts are struggling mightily to get the staff to provide the service that you've approved. At this point, Valley Metro's direction to those contracts has been, you signed a contract, you made an obligation, we expect you to get the staff, figure it out. Okay. And they are doing their best. They're doing their best because when they miss trips or when our security staff, security company can't staff a shift, they lose that revenue. And so I'll explain a moment. So our bus contracts are billed, for example, on a cost per revenue mile basis. And so that cost per revenue mile has a component that captures their fixed cost, like the cost, for example, in the West Valley of the bus yard. And then added on top of that is the cost of the operators to drive the bus. Okay, so if a bus contractor isn't providing a trip, they can't bill for those revenue miles, and they're not recouping the fixed cost associated with that. So when our contractors, whether they're security or bus operators, have vacancy, they're not saving money and pocketing that vacancy. They're losing revenue because they're not being paid for not providing that service, and therefore they're not recouping their fixed costs. Okay, so they've been working pretty hard to find ways to fill these shifts. We provided the AFS, I think it was 2 months ago, with a list of all the various things that our contractors were doing at that time. The list is a little longer now. And it's things like hiring bonuses and retention bonuses and hiring starting rates, and they're doing all of that out of their own pockets without financial support from Valley Metro. And it's not working, right? So when we shared that information a couple months ago, it was based on November information, and at that time, East Valley Bus missed 400 trips. In February, East Valley Bus missed 4,000 trips. They're trying hard, but the labor market is just too crazy for what they're able to do before they're just totally net losing money. Okay, the same thing is happening, frankly, on the security side that we'll talk about in the VMR budget. Okay, so we suspect that the time is going to come when the board has to make a decision as to whether we're going to increase wages to have the service we want, or whether we're going to decrease service to have the wages we want. Right? That time's not here yet. We haven't entered into any kind of negotiations with these contractors, but just looking at the way this is trending, like something's got to give. What we're doing right now is not working, and it's getting worse, not better. Okay, so when the board has to make that decision, if you decide that you want to increase wages to maintain service, then that's going to cost money. And so the reason that this is set up as a contingency is we want to set aside some money so that is available to you to fund that decision if you should make it. Now, I keep stressing the board and you because changing a contract requires a board action. Changing the expenditure authority associated with that contract requires a board action. So this isn't a Valley Metro contingency. This is a board contingency to be able to address these wage issues if you choose to. And if you don't, it just sits there. Further, I mentioned earlier that we didn't have designs on the $250 million in PTF surplus, but I will make an off-the-cuff suggestion. You could fund this contingency on the RPTA side with that PTF surplus, so it's not hitting your city budgets. But then if it's needed, it's there for you. And if it's not needed, it just simply stays in the PTF fund, right? Okay, so that's the—
I have a question.
Oh, please, sir.
So you keep talking about increasing wage. So is it strictly a dollar amount? They're not paying enough, or is there a talent?
Yeah. Thank you. What we're seeing is the labor market has become so much more competitive that people will just go work in as a delivery driver for Amazon instead of trying to drive a bus because I don't have to have a CDL and they pay $4 an hour more. And so it seems to be just a function of the labor market really tightening up and then people deciding to go where the money's at. Now, one other thing I guess I want to stress here is we're showing a total, there is one more issue here.
Well, wait.
I'm sorry, sir.
That's okay. You kind of glossed over my question. Oh. So I get jumping across the street for $4 more an hour, but you mentioned one thing, you don't have to have a CDL to do that. So for me, that says there's potentially a lack of talent out there, and it doesn't matter how much we pay, they're not going to get drivers. So do we know, in talking with the vendors, where that gap is? Is it a talent gap or is it a dollar gap?
Yeah.
Do we know? Not do we guess,
yeah,
but do we know?
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't address that clearly initially. So what we're being told from the vendors is this is primarily a dollar gap. that they did not have trouble staffing this 6 months ago. And you probably didn't just lose a whole bunch of CDL drivers over the last 6 months, that they're simply deciding to go where the money is.
So my understanding is the reason why we're unable to, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, to recruit bus drivers or they're leaving us is due to the fact that, and I thought they got paid more, but they get paid, I think, $15 an hour, $16 an hour as they enter. And my understanding is also they're equal to, I'm not sure what the other position is called. And when I was being briefed on this, I said, well, I wouldn't be a bus driver due to the fact of what I have to deal with on the bus or possible behavior issues for $15 an hour. My understanding is that's how they enter. However, the incentives or the as they grow and move within the systems becomes bigger and larger, and that's how they end up staying within our system. The other piece is if they walk away, they have a CDL, which costs a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of training. And they know that if they can walk away with the CDL and jump to another industry and get paid more and also get the better package. So I would say, yes, it's our wages, but I also think it's the way we probably speak about it or talk about it, and the encouragement of please stay with us because the longevity is much better than jumping. But right now, people are jumping because they're wanted and needed and they get the better package everywhere. So I'm not sure. I think it's a combo of both. Of we have them, they're leaving us because of that, and trying to entice somebody or encourage somebody to enter this career, we're not paying enough. But I could be wrong. But that's what the conversation we were having back and forth.
Yep, you bet.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and Vice Mayor, you're exactly right. It is a combination of a lot of things. I was recently at a CEO's conference, and I can tell you that our challenge is not unique. As a matter of fact, there was a comment made by one of the consultants who said he's been involved in the industry for 55 years now, and never in the history of public transportation can they ever remember reducing service because of lack of labor. We've reduced service due to financial considerations, other things, but this is nationwide. Nearly every agency is doing it, and there's just the inability to hire and hold on to enough operators and maintenance workers because of all the things you've mentioned. It is a national problem, and it's something we're just going to have to prepare to face.
Thank you, Scott. We also have Councilwoman Tomachoff on the WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. Do we have supporting data to this narrative as far as, like what is our competition? So we have an idea of, what may be required in order to fill this gap. We can't just shrug our shoulders and go, oh, well, if we need to make changes, and if we need to make changes, should we be discussing making immediate changes in this budget cycle? If you don't have drivers, you can't provide transit. So it seems like it's not something really to kick the can down the road, but the best place to start is with having data to show us like where are our shortfalls where we're having trouble recruiting and retaining people for this to provide this service. So my opinion is that this conversation needs to be happening as part of this budget, and in order to know how to address it, I would like to have some data.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks everyone for your comments. I think we frankly couldn't agree more. So one of the challenges that we're facing, and the reason that this has been termed a contingency, is this has really blown up in the last 3 months. So we're absolutely gathering data on what we think would be competitive in the various areas. This is item number 17 in your detail pack, and so you see some analysis of that, especially as it relates to security staffing, which really reflects more of the Valley Metro Rail budget. But But at the same time, we're reaching out to our colleagues in other properties and also starting to have conversations with the companies themselves to talk about sort of what are you seeing in the labor market and what do we think might be necessary. This recommendation doesn't specify a fix because we frankly don't feel like we're there yet. We're still gathering the data Representative Tomlichov put forward, and we want to be able to come to you with something solid. And of course, that ultimate fix will be a product of a negotiation with that vendor where the vendor has an incentive to get as much money as they possibly can. Okay, so we're creating this contingency reserve as a way of giving you flexibility should you decide this needs to be addressed in the months or in the budget year to come. But we're making a point not to include in our documentation what we think that fix should be or how much it should cost because it could bias those negotiations with the contractors. So we want to have those conversations with you individually, and we want to have them with your staff individually, and we'll be super transparent in that setting. In a public setting, we'd rather not say, we think it's $18 an hour, because you know what the provider's going to ask for is $18 an hour, because we will have already set that mark. So that's why this has been set out as a contingency. It's also, I'll just mention, rolling together a couple issues. So it's rolling together the bus issue we've talked a bit about today. It's rolling together the security issue that occurs both here and on the Valley Metro Rail side. And then there's one third issue in here that hasn't come up that I need to mention because I think it's particularly important for our West Valley cities. And that is Avondale has dramatically curtailed its Zoom circulator. And so that's resulted in about a 50% reduction in the revenue miles that the West Valley bus contractor will be paid for. And as I mentioned earlier, that rate of payment per revenue mile incorporates their fixed cost at the number of miles that the contract originally envisioned. So if you cut their revenue miles by 50%, you just cut the reimbursement for the rent on the bus yard that they're earning by 50%. And so the contract always had a term in it that said, if revenue miles fall below a certain threshold, the contractor can renegotiate. So that's going to go into effect in October. And we expect one of two things to happen. Either the contractor will say, here's the rate per revenue mile that I'm going to need to continue to provide this service, and it's going to be higher. Or they're going to say, this just isn't worth doing anymore, and we're walking away. And then we're going to have to be turning to our other contractors and saying, hey, would you guys be willing to pick up this service? And that's not going to be cheaper either. And so both cities should be incorporating some contingency funding in their budgets for that, because it's got to happen one way or the other. And then we're incorporating contingency funding for that in this line as well. So this line is rolling up a whole bunch of what I'll call known unknowns. They're things we know are out there and are likely to be real impacts in the months to come. But in the case of the labor issues, we're still really working through the comparators that Representative Tomlichov mentioned so that we can come forward with a solid proposal to you. And B, we don't want to put those out there publicly and individually so you're seeing them as a large roll-up amount called contingency so that no one vendor can kind of tell what we've got in mind for them.
Mr. Chair,
I wanted to spend some time on this because it's kind of confusing.
Mr. Chair, if I could, then, well, I just wanted to point out one thing that I believe Mr. Manal should be on the meeting, that contract negotiations, I think, are allowable conversation to occur in executive session. So there is an opportunity to address this with the board in executive session. And Mr. Manal can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I believe that it does qualify for executive session. And secondly, with the reduction in service by really any member city, and I've had this discussion with Mr. Smith, and I don't know, I believe Valley Metro does the contracts, but it's really going to be challenging if cities that are part of this regional, commitment essentially start stepping away from these commitments and then leave all the other cities trying to juggle 4 balls instead of 3. So I don't know if we need to make some changes. I understand the contract that we have already exists and the language can't be changed, but going forward, do we need to address this with, for example, the city of Glendale? I mean, if we commit to this service for 5 years, then we shouldn't be able to exit part of that commitment and leave other people responsible for the fulfilling the contract. So I think that at some point we're going to have that discussion. Thank you.
You want to answer, Mike?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I could just take a moment to answer the question. Yes, under the statutory framework that governs executive sessions, there are particular aspects of the statute that allow for certain discussions regarding contracts to occur in executive session. And so in the event in the future we wanted to take a path like that, I would work very closely with the chair and the executive management team to make sure it's properly agendized and then it follows all the legally available remedies for having discussions in that way.
Perfect. I know we have a couple more questions. Just time check. It's 11:21. We going into our regular meeting time, but for those on WebEx, we're still in the study session, so still have several slides to go through. So bear with us, and then we'll move on to our normal agenda after the study session. But Councilwoman Arredondo Savage.
Thank you, Chair. And just really quick, Jim, because I don't want to, you don't even have to answer this, but I think information that I think will be really relevant moving forward. And one, I'm really glad that I think we're taking this to June, because I feel like this is such a high level. I know we've asked some questions from our city directly to you, and I appreciate getting those answers, but you know, they're pretty detailed stuff. And I think one of the things as we talk about that contingency amount that you have listed in there is I really want to better understand, and I think the board would be well if we really understand how the contingency works currently in the budget. Do we have a contingency for each contract? I know we have some of the unprogrammed PTF funds that can be used and how that's used. So when we talk about really kind of understanding how the budget works, that's going to be a really big piece as we talk about this new VM recommendations and how that incorporates it and changes how we've been doing things in the past. So if we could put that on the radar, maybe Chair Stipp, we can talk about that in AFS as we take a little bit deeper dive to understand that transition, because I think it's going to be really key as we move forward and what that looks like in our contracts in the future if we move that direction.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, I know we're over time, so let me move quickly. So the last issue that I want to highlight here, it impacts both RPTA, which you see here, and then it's repeated on the next slide, so we won't cover it twice, just cover it here, is the Valley Metro staff labor market. And this is exactly the same conversation, but with our FTEs, not our contractors. And so I'll just say very quickly to Representative Thomas Schaaf's point, we are at a crisis in maintenance of way and maintenance of equipment in terms of staffing. You know, Rob has and you see this, I think it's issue 18 in your detailed folder. We have a 44% vacancy in light rail vehicle inspectors. We've got a 40% vacancy in electromechanics, and I think a 30% vacancy in traction power mechanics. And so like Ray said yesterday, as part of a meeting that we had with some of the rail cities, that if that situation persists when the Super Bowl gets here, we won't be able to serve the Super Bowl like we did last year, because we simply can't physically put 50 cars on the system today. And so that absolutely has to be addressed. It's at crisis proportions, and there's an important difference, frankly, between a bus contract and rail maintenance, because as terrible as missing a trip is, because you're stranding a rider and you're telling them that you're unreliable, the very next day the schedule starts over again. With deferred maintenance, that maintenance doesn't go away when you don't do it, it just piles up. And then you have to do it later because the stuff all has to get done. And so if it continues to pile up for very long, we simply won't be able to address it. Even if we were fully staffed, we'll need to be extra fully staffed to make up for all the deferred maintenance. So it's critical that we address this. How are we doing that? You'll see in your detailed write-up that there's a couple things we're implementing this year out of this year's budget. We can do it out of this year's budget because we have so much vacancy savings from all of these, and we're paying so much overtime that it's worth, that we can address it without coming to you for any additional funds. Those are a $2,000 hiring bonus, a $1,500 retention bonus to the operations staff only. We're making some changes to pay a little more shift differential, because one of the things that keeps people from applying is they have to work nights. We're going to increase our shift diff, and increasing starting rates for those classifications where we're simply not getting folks applying because our starting wages aren't competitive. So there's a number of those things that we're doing in this year's budget with this year's funding. Don't need additional funding to do that. Most of those are essentially one time, so they don't really impact next year's budget. There is one thing that does impact next year's budget that we really believe we need to do this year, and that is over the past couple of years, our staff merit increases sort of haven't kept pace with either the market or with what your cities are doing. And I think if you look in the detailed description, we reached out to a number of cities and asked their HR teams, hey, what have you guys done in recent years? And so as you may recall, we had 1.5% in 21, we had 3% in 22. The rate of inflation in Maricopa County this year is 10%. And so we, like Mesa, like Avondale, and several other cities, would like to do a 5% COLA this year. We can do that out of this year's budget without any additional funding. However, that of course gets annualized into next year's budget because it's an ongoing cost. So the things I mentioned a minute ago about hiring bonuses and those things, we're just doing those because we have to do them. We got a crisis. This COLA we wanted to share with the board before going forward with. We do think it's important to do sooner rather than later because we're losing ground every single day. But because it annualized cost into next year, we didn't want to do it on our own recognizance. We wanted to make sure we had your feedback first. So that is what's in that issue. You'll see the detailed write-up. I think it's issue number 18 in your packet. And we really look forward to having a timely discussion of that because we're at crisis level right now. Okay, let me very quickly move through Valley Metro Rail. Pass-throughs, this is essentially just us passing monies through to the city, or in the case of the VMR reimbursement, it's shuffling costs between VMR and RPTA. There's no policy decisions, so we won't waste time on it. VMR overview. So this is essentially the same story that we had in RPTA with one very important difference. I'll just highlight that and move on. So you see in the base budget, we're taking $1 million out of support services as part of our base change. If we go all the way over to the total change, you'll see that the year-over-year increase for RPTA is $19 million, which on an $80 million base is not a small percentage. However, the important difference here is if you look down at the city funded line, you'll see that while total costs are going up $19 million, city costs are going up less than $900,000. And that's because of COVID relief funding. So we've got $33 million of COVID relief funding in this budget that we couldn't expend last year because of limitations on contract terms that allow us to buy that down this year. So that's a really important difference. Now, let me quickly show you the tricolor chart because there's a couple of things here that didn't come up in our previous discussion, and then I will let you get on to the regular meeting. So the first thing is, just like in the last discussion, there are a couple of key items in the recommendations column that are, in fact, inflationary items. We just put them there because they're decision points, unlike things that are mandatory. The top one is insurance cost contingency. So many of you know our insurance costs went up like 48% last year. We're continuing to add rolling stock to the fleet for Tempe streetcar and for the new alignments. And so I think our legal team believes there's a likelihood that our insurance rates will go up again because you're increasing the number of assets you're insuring, et cetera, et cetera. And so they think it's wise to set aside some funding for the potential of an insurance increase. And that's a decision that you'll need to make as a board. The operations contingency is what we were just talking about. It's related to the Allied Universal staff. I think there's one important thing to recognize here. So our Allied Universal staff, as you know, do security and fair enforcement on our rail alignment. And they're unable to staff about a third of shifts right now. And so our level of fair enforcement is falling fairly dramatically. If this keeps up, I think we would expect it to continue to fall in the months to come because they're simply not able to get in the door the quality of people that they need for this role. It's kind of a dangerous role because you're really interacting with people in an open way. You're not sort of sitting in a truck driving around an HOA. There's a feedback loop here, of course, because what we saw during the pandemic was the minute we stopped doing rigorous fare enforcement, our fare per rider fell from 71 cents per rider per trip to 26 cents per rider per trip. Like if you're not asking them to show fare, they stop buying fare. And so the minute people start to realize that we simply can't staff fare enforcement like we used to, we would frankly expect to see a similar kind of reduction. So Tyler mentioned a minute ago, one of the other things helping out the VMR budget is a doubling of fare revenue back to fare enforcement. If we stop doing fare enforcement, we'd expect something like that the $2.5 million that's incorporated there, for a lot of that to evaporate. And so the trick, I think, with security is you have a little bit of a pay me now or pay me later. We can either pay the wages to staff that and do fare enforcement, or we can pay for the loss of fares that they're not enforcing. And so this is also an important one for us to think through as we continue. And then the last one there is the VM labor market once again. Now, I'll just mention, as I did before, that when you net those out of the mandatory inflation and the continuing commitments, what you're left with is basically $2.9 million in discretionary spending in this budget. $2.9 million on an $80 million base is a 3.5% increase. So if we weren't dealing with inflation and we weren't dealing with these continuing commitments, what we would be bringing to you is a request for an additional 3.5%. And that's for a system that's growing because we're adding Tempe streetcar and we're adding track miles and aging, right? So it's going from being a young system that didn't require a lot of maintenance to a middle-aged system that is. And so a 3.5% increase under those circumstances, I think, is also remarkably conservative. So With that,
Hey, Jim, real quick, Vice Mayor Pastore, you have a question?
I have a question about security.
you bet.
When you say security, are you talking about those that are on the platform that are riding the light rail? Okay. I sat on a transit committee, I want to say 6 years ago, led the fight to add security to the platforms because it was not secure. And my constituents, or our constituents from doesn't matter what city, was the issue. On top of that, City of Phoenix also built a squad, a transit squad or team that interacts with the security on the platform. And so I understand, I think that's a deeper conversation for all of us to talk about security and what that looks like and how we can balance it all. The other piece, I just came from DC and was talking with some transportation people, and I want to say Kansas. I think we do some of this, but the conversation was about our transit system, and the other piece was that they incorporated nonprofits on the platform that also serviced our unsheltered population and be able to try to connect them to services. So I think that's going to be a probably future conversation with all of us on how we look at that, only because the unsheltered population is growing, and some of the dynamics is access and them on the platforms and trains. And so trying to have a more holistic conversation with the cities as we move forward in that arena. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And just very quickly, we share your concern about the safety aspect of this. And in fact, I appreciate you raising it because I'd kick myself if I'd glossed over it. You know, since we have seen vacancy skyrocket with our security contractors, we've seen 129% increase in assaults on passengers, because we simply don't have that presence to deter bad behavior. So that's super important aspect of this. Okay, very quickly, because I know we're way past time. We have a capital budget. It's great. It's mostly funded by a combination of PTF and federal funds. And as you can see, it is going up modestly on the RPTA side. This is mostly buying buses for RPTA. And then on the VMR side, we have a whole bunch of projects, and those projects, are funded primarily by federal funds and PTF with some member city contributions. And the total capital budget is going down quite a bit as we're starting to taper off on some of the larger construction projects during the course of this year. So that's the 50,000-foot view of that. The city funding that's in here is all funding that's been negotiated with your cities as part of these projects, and none of that is changing. So we probably don't need to spend a lot of time on this because it's all individual projects that your cities are aware well of and approved of, and the budgets. And all we're doing is deciding what year the costs fall into, not whether they're cost or not or any of that. Okay, so with that, I'll just quickly mention the upcoming meetings that we talked about a little bit earlier, and all the various opportunities between now and May. And of course, we'll add the June cycle as likely as well. And we look forward to working with each of you in these upcoming settings and with your staff. And we please hope that you'll contact us individually if you have questions on things in the materials we've provided. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jim and Tyler, for the information. And I think what you said, helps us start this ongoing conversation from now until June. Looking at the details, I think we'll have ample time to look at that piece. But appreciate the intro here, and look forward to working with you all going forward. So,
Thank you.
Just for information.
Councilwoman.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you, Chair. Really quick. And just for the future too, Jim, I know I didn't say it earlier. And one thing you talked about was not wanting to do service cuts. And I certainly do appreciate that. Nobody wants to do that. But just for the record, just so you know, I mean, the city of Tempe did have to do service cuts in order to meet our budget. So I just want to say, as we move forward, it'd be really great to understand that we do have certain cities, especially for people that are new board members, that are paying a lot of direct funding that they have in their own personal taxes to pay for transit, and how that impacts our overall region. So if we can incorporate that a little bit more in detail, I think would be really helpful to get a bigger picture.
Sure.
Great, thank you. Thank you,
Perfect.
Frankie.
Well, thank you. So we'll take maybe, I know there's lunch, or do folks want to grab some lunch here? Take 10 minutes and then come back and start the regular meeting? Perfect.
Are we going to
All
use
right.
this same link as for the board meeting, right?
Yes, just
Yeah.
stay on this link today. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
come back 10 minutes from now and we'll get started.
Come on down. Come on down. Come on down to the 101. We'll have to ask the FDA if it's okay, but I don't know if I got time. Yeah, otherwise you're starting on round.
You already transit out there? No. You get too far out, you're not transit. I need to work on mine. Oh, really?
You know, Seinfeld did yada, yada, yada.
Really? They should get in the car with her.
We'll get, we'll wait one more minute, Pat, or, okay.
No more minutes.
All right, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our March 24th, 2022 Valley Metro RPTA and Valley Metro Rail meeting. Those on WebEx, you should have received the agenda. We'll get started. Make sure on WebEx, if you all put yourself on mute, and if you have a question, just there's a function, a raising hand function that you can click so we can call on you. So first item, or Pat, why don't you do a roll call? Sorry about that.
City of Avondale, Vice Mayor Veronica Malone. City of Buckeye, Councilmember Clay Goodman.
Present.
City of Chandler, Mayor Kevin Harkey.
Here.
City of El Mirage, Mayor Alexis Hermosillo. Town of Fountain Hills, Councilmember Mike Charnow.
Present.
Town of Gilbert, Mayor Bridget Peterson. City of Glendale, Councilmember Lauren Tolmachoff.
Here.
City of Goodyear, Councilmember Bill Stipp.
Present.
Maricopa County Supervisor Jack Sellers.
Here.
City of Mesa, Councilmember Francisco Heredia.
Here.
City of Peoria, Councilmember John Edwards.
Here.
City of Phoenix, Vice Mayor Laura Pastor. Representing the town of Queen Creek today, Councilmember Robin Benning.
Here.
City of Scottsdale, Councilmember Betty Janik.
Here.
City of Surprise, Councilmember Chris Judd.
Present.
City of Tempe, Councilmember Robin Arredondo Savage. Thank you. City of Tolleson, Councilmember Aldolfo Gomez. Town of Wickenburg, Mayor Rui Pereira. And Town of Youngtown, Mayor Michael LaVault.
Yes, I'm here.
Chair, we're set.
Perfect. Thank you, Pat. First item on the agenda, public comment. Public will be provided an opportunity at this time to address the board. And you'll have 3 minutes of a time. We have a couple comment cards here. I'll start with Mr. Luke Crowley. You have 3 minutes, please.
Start it again. Thank you. Glad to be appearing before you today, bringing out some of the things that are your responsibilities and also some of your past behaviors that we need to get addressed and taken care of. First off, since this is a blended committee, I love that you're going to be addressing something on the rail. Being that if you look at everything, it looks like rail is the only thing that is important to y'all, but I want to know, you're supposed to be multimodal. With all the new plans for the rail you've got, how many on that west side extension? 5 routes that don't have a stop? How many are downtown don't have a stop connecting the bus with the rail? Are you being multimodal, or what's the reason for this? I understand that if you don't have stops, the rail goes faster, but then you also lessen the amount of ridership and such. So if y'all could figure that out, the planning department, that you're supposed to be doing things multimodal, when are you going to get to it? I note that with your planning and such that you're doing, that $2 billion hit that you took changed everything from what we had planned. I was the one that did the bus. I was the head of the bus committee for the Prop 400. That's why we've got bike racks on the buses. But the other part is that we were doing multimodal and expanding in every single one of the communities that you were either to be connected to the system or have circulators within to connect to the system. It's not happening. Where are all the facilities? You need to have a covered bus stop every quarter mile. That's what it says is the industry standard, but it needs to be covered. Why? Because it is a health concern in the summertime. If you're standing out there for over 8 minutes, at the maximum 6 when it gets to be 117, that is injurious to your health. But what do? How many of the stops don't have anything? I'd also like to point out this document, it's from 2018, and it's got the Waymo stuff on here, and it's sprouting about how it's going to be connecting people to first stop and to the rail or the bus. That's a lie. Waymo never did anything near the rail. Their little test area, not what you put together, what they put together, stopped a half a mile from the rail. So when you guys were saying, hey, we're getting this to work into the system and get it done, and now you've got them doing your disabled, but initially you said this is what we're going to be doing, and it was a lie. See you in the next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Crawley. Next person, we have Marvin Lofton. Marvin, you have 3 minutes.
Morning, everyone. I was going to come here to talk about my frustration over the no-show buses, and I'm glad I came early so I could hear the chairman, and that took away my anxiety on that. My big concern right now is the CDC's, the drivers are not adhering to the CDC summary about wearing masks on the bus because they're not wearing masks. And they're allowing passengers to not wear masks as well. I missed 20 buses, no-show buses during the last part of December through February. And the drivers at this point, I have submitted to customer feedback 41 drivers not wearing masks and 60 passengers not wearing masks. That's not a good thing. If I have to wear a mask and you have an announcement saying you need to wear a mask and a driver sitting there without a mask, I have a problem with that. And I don't know, me turning that information in is supposed to go to their supervisor. There's no way for me to know if that actually happened. If someone could get back with me on that, I left my phone number moving forward. But it's not a good idea to, if they're not going to follow the rules, federal rules, I know this is not going to happen, but get rid of the contractors and hire your own people and train them, you might have some more jurisdiction over that possibility. But I just feel that I'm an end user. I've been doing it for years, and it's a good system. And I'm appreciative of what you're trying to do to feed the whole area and continue with that. But please follow up with these contractors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lofton, and can't answer your questions, but we'll have staff reach out back to you with your comments. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Next person, we have Councilmember Roland Winters.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you. What service? I'll go up front if you don't mind.
Sure.
See all these happy faces.
You can go further.
Good morning. Most of you here know me. My name is Roland Winters Jr. I'm a city councilman for the city of Surprise. And in Surprise, we give our guest speakers 4 minutes. We're kind of stingy with 3 minutes. But I'm here not only to speak for myself, but also to speak for many of my constituents who are disabled and depend on the ride choice program that Valley Metro supplies to us. And we do appreciate the program. So we don't want my comments to misconstrue the situation. But I want to take, and if I go over time, just throw me a rotten tomato or something like that. And so I'll just take the last week or so. When I called up the ride choice and scheduled my rides for a 10 o'clock meeting I had at City Hall. I scheduled for 9:30. Well, exactly at 10 o'clock when the meeting started, I get a phone call saying we cannot get a driver to pick you up. A lot of my constituents don't have a second choice or a plan B. I at least do. I have a couple of people that are really grateful. I'm grateful for them standing by and being able to drive my van, which is fully equipped with disabled things we need. And so I missed that meeting. Yesterday, I'll bring you up to yesterday, I had, they said that they had Wheels on Wheels was going to pick me up. And when that time came for to pick me up, they want to negotiate the time to pick me up. Can't negotiate the time. My time's not negotiable, especially when I got people sitting at City Hall waiting for me to appear at a meeting. Now I know I've talked to Wyatt and I've talked to Tom and a lot of your staff, and I'm sure they're doing their best they can. But I'm sorry, it's not good enough. And we have people that we had actually had 3 people that are going to accompany me to this meeting today. But I get the feeling that the long haul they did feel was worth the small amount of progress we would have gotten. But that's what's happening in Surprise as far as transit goes. And we don't have money for a bus to run around Surprise. That really compounds the situation. We have a TransDev, which recently is not doing too bad, but our ride choice program really is bad. J&J was given the contract back. This is their second time around. They were worthless the first time around, so I don't know why the contract was given to them the second time around. And this business of
we're at time, council member, but you can finish your comment there.
what's that?
You're at time, sir, council member. But finish your comment there.
Okay. The J&J, when they're trying to figure out the transit in Arizona and they're in Maryland, that doesn't work. We need somebody close to this situation. We need some boots on the ground. Somebody in close to Surprise or some of the other cities in the West Valley. West Valley Rise. They pulled into my driveway and then pulled out again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think that ends our public comment section, the agenda. We'll move on with item number 2, Chief Executive Officer report, Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Celebration, my last CEO's report. We'll go through it here. Okay. There we go. Oop. On March 18th, we celebrated the National Transit Employee Appreciation Day with operators and maintenance staff at our rail and bus facilities. We've talked to you about the challenges that we've had, but I can tell you that we have hundreds of operators and maintenance personnel that provide great service for all of it, and we thought it was appropriate for us to recognize the service that they give to us and the good work that they do. As you can see, First Transit out of our bus facility provided shirts to all contracted staff, and riders also stepped up. This is a comment that came on our Facebook, and for those of you who can't read it, I appreciate all of the people who help others get to where they need to go. We're all trying to put food on the table, and for a lot of us, it wouldn't happen without y'all. We found out during the pandemic just how essential our services are, and these are the essential of essential workers too. We talked a little bit during the budget about gas prices and ridership, just some data that's come in recently. In February, 24% increase in ridership from 2021. As you can see, bus was up 16%, light rail up over 50%. Just to give you some context, historically, transit ridership increases lag fuel price increases, but we are expecting our ridership to continue to go up as they did back the last time it was there was $4 a gallon. And between the 7th and the 27th, we had over 50 news stories generating over 2 million viewers with this question: what is the increase in gas prices? You see Brittany Hoffman from our staff here doing a great job of communicating the message of the impact on public transportation and the service that we provide, the opportunities that we have. Just last Saturday, I had the privilege with Supervisor Jack Sellers from our board and Valley Metro staff of representing Valley Metro at the Arizona Forward Environmental Excellence Awards Gala. This was celebrating their 50th anniversary. In Valley Metro, we were so privileged to receive one of 3 special awards. The honor went to someone in the central region. This is not something we applied for. It was given to us, and it was given in recognition of Valley Metro's contribution to our metro area and to the environment and all the good things public transportation do. On February 25th, we had the honor with Congress Mayor Greg Stanton to host Chairman Peter DeFazio, who's the chairman of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. We know Chairman DeFazio well and have worked with him, and Representative Stanton. Here you see Tempe Mayor Corey Woods. We also had Mesa Mayor John Giles. We gave Chairman DeFazio a tour of the streetcar and also went into Mesa to discuss the plans they have, including the recent $920,000 grant they had to plan the TOD along a potential streetcar extension in Mesa. So very happy for that. And Chairman DeFazio was very impressed. We also recently, okay, why isn't it working? There we go. We also recently received from ASU a report on our Waymo automated vehicle ride choice demonstration. This was a limited pilot. We're looking to do more things, which this board has allowed us to do with Waymo. But the ASU study surveyed participants who had participated in that, and there's a few things that we found encouraging as we move forward to see what the future of autonomous vehicles are with public transportation. Participants, as you can see, felt safe. They thought the AV service was more convenient, and they believed that they would engage in more out-of-home activities if they had this service available. We're hoping that in the future, as Waymo extends its service area, that we can interact with all of our modes of transportation. We also recently were very pleased to receive, along with the City of Phoenix, both 2 separate grants. This one secured by Senator Kelly, over $1 million to fund a demonstration project on electric buses. We're going to, Phoenix received, as I said, a companion grant. We're working closely with them. I know, Vice Mayor, your council has given some direct instruction to your city staff to look at this. Electric buses create a unique challenge for us simply because of our our environment. The last couple times we've had electric buses in for tests, we always test them in the end of July, usually on a date of 110, and the batteries have certainly not held up to what they purported, just simply because the drain on the AC and what heat does to batteries. So we know that the technology is rapidly improving. We're going to use this $1 million grant to conduct further studies, as I've said, join forces with Phoenix staff to really get an idea of what the future and what we will need to do. We know that technology will catch up and that electric buses are in our future. We're just going to find out a little bit more about how we interact within our environment. Available for you now is an updated Valley Metro 2022 system fact sheet. If you haven't seen one of these, it's very, very informational. It has all the down and dirty of data about our system, the number of people, the number of routes, number of riders. It's on our website. If you'd like Pat to send you a copy, she can talk to her. She can certainly do it. And now I'd like to, since this is my last CEO's report, I'm asking Mr. Chair for your indulgence. I'd like to take just a few minutes to talk about my experience and how I feel. In December of 2015, I received 2 phone calls as I was on the road returning from after living on the East Coast for a few months. The first call was from Gilbert Councilwoman and soon to be Mayor Jen Daniels. Soon after that, Phoenix Councilwoman Thelda Williams rang. These 2 council members, both of whom I look up to and respect greatly, were then serving on the Valley Metro Board. They both had 2 questions. First, was I aware of the situation with Valley Metro? And second, would I be interested in serving as the interim CEO for Valley Metro for a few months until a permanent CEO could be hired? On the first question, I told them that I'd been closely following the Valley Metro troubles from afar. The second question, I told them I'd have to think about it. Most of all, I was deeply honored to have been even considered to take on such an important task. I know what you're probably thinking. They must have been really desperate to call me, but that entered my heart and my head. By the time I got home to Mesa a couple days later, I told them I could help them for maybe up to 9 months. After that, I had plans and would move on. So I became the interim CEO to try and bring some normalcy to Valley Metro, and the board began the search for CEO. Unlike now, where this board was privileged to attract an impressive group of candidates from which Jessica Mefford Miller was chosen, the applicants in 2016 failed to impress. Now, apparently in a moment of absolute desperation, the board asked me to stay on as the permanent CEO. Thus began a journey that I never could have imagined. The past 6 years have been a roller coaster of challenges, successes, and emotions. And I cannot express how grateful I am to have been given the opportunity to have been a part of Valley Metro and our region's public transportation program. I'm also very proud to have been able to be a member of the Valley Metro team, and it is an amazing team. Most of all, I have been very fortunate for the people I have been privileged to work with and the relationships I have formed through the good times and bad, successes and challenges. It's true that no one person makes an organization successful. I've been blessed to work with an outstanding group of men and women who do the important work at Valley Metro. I'm especially grateful for their examples and the lessons they have taught me as we have worked together toward a common goal. When I arrived at Valley Metro, the entire organization was in a state of shock. It's tough when you're in the newspaper almost daily with negative news stories. As in any crisis, people were confused and frightful about the future. Many were scared they would lose their jobs. I had a lot of people in tears in my office. It was a very difficult time. Valley Metro faced other serious challenges early on, such as an administration in Washington that was not exactly a friend of transit, and a vocal and impassioned challenge to light rail here in Phoenix. But this group persevered. They worked together as a team focused on shifting gears, committed to transitioning to excellence. Team members also looked inward and asked basic questions about their purpose and mission. To an outsider, this may seem like a meaningless fluff, feel-good exercise with little substance. But when you're in a crisis, this type of introspection is critical in overcoming basic difficulties. The most important our team asked was very simple. Why do we exist? Why do we exist? After a whole lot of discussion, debate, and contemplation, the team arrived at an answer. We exist to connect communities and enhance lives. In all my years as a leader in business, politics, and government, I'm not sure I've ever been more proud than I have been as our team first embraced and then worked to live up to this commitment. It drives our organization and our decision-making each and every day. I've been most fortunate to have a very special executive leadership team by my side as we have met these challenges. They're a unique group with diverse backgrounds, talents, and personalities, but they've been invaluable to me. I trust them implicitly to do what is best for Valley Metro, our employees, city partners, and the public we serve. In return, they have accepted my leadership and have believed in and supported me in my ideas, initiatives, and efforts. But they have also been honest and not shy about telling me when I think I'm full of it, when I'm misguided or straight out wrong. Every leader should be blessed to have the kind of openness and trust with their team. My leaders have inspired me to be and to do better and have taught me invaluable lessons during these past 6 years. I believe they will do the same for Jessica as she begins her tenure as CEO. If there is one disappointment for my time at Valley Metro, it's that I believe this team is often undervalued and underappreciated for the work they do and the successes they achieve. Valley Metro is a unique animal with a somewhat awkward place in our region's political framework. This presents unusual challenges to our team in addition to the daily grind of putting out service and building large projects, but the team still thrives. I'd like to share with you some Valley Metro professionals I have especially learned from and leaned on over the past few years. Most are familiar to you, but some may not be. They will all be critical to Jessica as she takes on this responsibility, and I'm confident they'll help her succeed. And I apologize in advance. I don't have time to name them all. If I could, I would name every single Valley Metro team member. So if I apologize if you're not in here. First of all, Hillary Foose. Hillary is the conscience of Valley Metro. I know of nobody who cares more for each and every user of our system and who advocates for them daily. She has been a constant reminder to me that the people we serve matter most, that our projects and assets are only as good as our riders. Hillary and her team often provide our connection with the community. In December 2018, for example, they led a celebration anniversary of the 10th anniversary of light rail. Their efforts resulted in an unprecedented amount of positive media coverage during the month and into the new year that set the stage for the successful defense of light rail with Phoenix voters the next summer. Did their efforts make a difference? I think it did. In advance of that vote, a poll revealed that Phoenix residents had named Valley Metro as the most respected and trusted government community entity in the metro area. In less than 3 years, our team had won back the respect of the community. I will always be proud of how our team bounced back. A large part of that respect is due to Ray Abraham and his team. From Ray, I have learned just how difficult it is to consistently provide safe, reliable transit service. Providing transit service is not easy. It's a complicated and complex process. But Ray, along with his deputies, Rob Rosenberg, Dan Filipino, Rick White, and others are obsessive about rail and bus operations. I have never been around people who are as totally committed to excellence as they are. I will miss the 2 a.m. texts and emails on some operational issue for either bus or rail. They do such a good job that often their efforts are taken for granted. But at the national level, I can tell you their work managing special events operations during construction is recognized by their peers. I also would be remiss if I did not talk about our entire operations staff during the pandemic. Men and women showing up in the early stages of the pandemic, scared, not knowing what this COVID meant, but they put bus and rail and paratransit service out every day. They will always be my heroes. And I mean that seriously. I will never forget. Penny Lynch not only runs Valley Metro's human resources operations, but she is the heart and soul of our workforce. She has taught me the importance of empathy and human touch as she deals with balancing our team members' challenges with the needs of the agency. She and Julie Landsberg have also developed from scratch an impressive training and development program that allows our members the opportunity to learn and grow professionally. Jim Hilliard, you got to experience Jim. He's the brains of Valley Metro. Professor Hilliard, as he is known, has brought a disciplined, data-driven emphasis to our management efforts. Jim has taught and shown me how much more effective we can be when using relevant data. He's also our utility infielder, playing a multitude of positions at Valley Metro. He may start the day working with Phil Oslin in developing a detailed IT proposal for the board, then work with Tom Young on a plan for improving paratransit operations. Oh, and you just noticed, and I've been overly impressed by how he has seamlessly served as our interim CFO for the past 9 months. Speaking of paratransit, prior to Jim and Tom, Ron Brooks and Rob Antoniak took on the daunting task of bringing some order to a fractured and very inefficient regional paratransit system. They work closely with your city staff to bring uniformity and consistency to the system by advancing the one rule, one fare, one call concept. As you heard from Roland, while that work is still very much ongoing, the changes that have been embraced by your cities have saved millions of dollars and brought more consistent service across the region. Adrienne Ruiz has taught me the beauty of committed professionalism. She has elevated our safety and quality assurance programs to national prominence and has deftly handled the myriad of security challenges brought on by the pandemic. I would trust her with my most precious possessions, knowing she would put the interests of me and others before herself. The newbie on our team, Henry Ikwadukwa, took over our Capital and Services Division just a year ago in the middle of some of the most intense development work since we built the original light rail system 15 years ago. He and his team of leaders, Trevor Collin, Robert Forrest, Carol Ketterside, Joe Gregory, and Nomar Peters, have shown me how teams can work together to improve processes and take on complex challenges and projects. Henry's infectious style and can-do attitude are an inspiration to us. Most of all, Henry is often the only one who laughs at my stupid jokes. I never fully understood the complexity of rail development until we were meeting last week with FTA Executive Director Matt Welbus in Washington, D.C. Matt pointed out how unusual it was for any CEO to have been involved in as many rail development projects as I have been during my tenure. He said most rail CEOs might get to build 1, 2, maybe 3 rail projects. Visionary leaders that came well before me created our system. I have been very lucky to be in the right place at the right time to be able to help build that vision, and have been deeply involved in 7 rail projects, 8 if you count my time as mayor. It's over $2 billion of projects. At one time, Valley Metro had 5 rail projects, various stages before the FTA. Henry's team and Wolf Grope before him and his team have handled it all successfully. The professional manner in which our team has worked with FTA has impressed its leadership. I've been fortunate to have worked closely with 4 FTA administrators and 4 secretaries of transportation. One senior FTA official recently lauded the, quote, enviable relationship, unquote, between Valley Metro and the federal agency. That kind of compliment does not happen without good people doing a lot of good work, and I have been extremely fortunate to have been surrounded by good people. Alexis Tamron Kinsey. Alexis is a rock. She has been both an anchor and North Star since she came to Valley Metro almost 3 years ago. Alexis is the definition of integrity and is one of the most honest and truthful people I have had the privilege of working with. She has demonstrated to me how values and principles should never be compromised. Her straightforward, honest approach is, to be honest, not always appreciated in this business and in this region. But I appreciate and have been blessed that she is both brutally honest with me. Her example has shown me how to be a better person. Many people may not realize that Alexis and I are political oil and water. I was a conservative Republican mayor. Alexis was the chair of the Arizona Democratic Party. I will especially miss our energetic discussions over what we believed were important, but mostly were trivial political issues. Our political conversations are often passionate, but we always do it in good fun and have walked away from these talks as friends. That, unfortunately, is something that's not a lot less common today than it used to be. It's going to be very tough finding somebody who is so reliably wrong on so many issues. I will miss Hillary. I will miss Alexis. What can I say about the glue of our organization? I'm not sure what any of us could do without Pat Dillon and Gina French-Kavash. No, I still can't speak Polish. They have taught me what true loyalty and dedication mean. They are completely loyal to Valley Metro and its mission. You on the board and our team members. They each have decades of experience and knowledge that they willingly and humbly share with all of us. Jessica, if you are watching, these 2 are your foundation. They are just amazing individuals who personify what real service means. We could also not have been successful without the help of a literal army of contractors and partners who call Valley Metro home. Many of them blend right in with our team. I'm especially grateful to our service providers, First Transit, ACI, Total Transit, and TransDev, and for our current and former prime contractors, especially HDR, Hill International, WSP, Arcadis, and all the hundreds of individuals and firms, big and small, who work under their umbrellas. The many engineering and construction companies also play an integral role in our success. Finally, although they reside in Washington, D.C., I want to recognize the efforts of our partners at Cardinal Infrastructure. Anya Graves, Mike Piper, and their team have taught me the ways of Washington and how to navigate the strange and complex world of the federal government. They have worked tirelessly on our behalf with the FTA and Congress to get projects approved in difficult circumstances, bringing hundreds of millions of dollars to Metro Phoenix and in working through regulatory challenges to all of our operations. I have worked with many lobbyists. They are simply the best. We are fortunate to have them on our team. I'll end with an account of their most recent, which was also the most gratifying effort for me. Early in the pandemic, we were faced with the realization that if COVID caused local sales tax revenues to decrease, which we thank heavens found it didn't, but we were scared that it would put us in a world of hurt if we could not meet the requirements for the local match of our rail projects. We at Valley Metro conceived an idea to ask Congress for a special allocation of COVID relief funds to backstop our local revenues. We shopped our idea to APTA, city partners and others, but found nobody interested in helping us. But Anya and her team were not deterred. They approached their contacts at other agencies who were in the same predicament as us, mainly Seattle, Minneapolis, and Los Angeles, and saw support of congressional committee staff. We found a friendly ear with the staff of House Transportation Chair Peter DeFazio, who agreed to work on the bill with us. Our idea evolved into legislation that was part of the last COVID relief package approved by Congress. The package included $1.35 billion in additional money for projects across the company whose project grants had been approved before COVID, but who had not yet opened for service. The South Central Extension and Tempe Streetcar were two of those projects. Until this effort, I had never been involved in the whole gamut of conceiving, writing legislation from scratch, and then working to get it passed by Congress and signed by the president. We were very lucky to have somebody like Anya and Mike on our team. Last week, a week or so ago, I was notified by FTA Region 9 Administrator Ray Tellis that the FTA had formally awarded grant funds to the South Central Extension. This $98 million in total for our region. So, Vice Mayor, as my parting gift to you, I'm pleased to leave $90 million, which will be used by the city of Phoenix to build up its T2050 balance for projects in your city. And to you, Councilmember Arredondo Savage, $17 million it will be headed to the Tempe Streetcar, which will be used for streetcar enhancements, such as the paving that you see now on Mill, Apache, and University, and over $10 million, which will go directly to the city of Tempe to boost up your transportation fund. So I leave with a level of great satisfaction and gratitude for allowing me to be part of this important endeavor. I depart with the belief and satisfaction Valley Metro is in a better place now than it was when I arrived 6 years ago. That is what happens when you get to work with dedicated and talented people. I'm comfortable moving on at this time because I'm confident these people will provide the same support to Jessica and Valley Metro as they have to me. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Scott, and beautiful message. I think we have just want to take this opportunity to formally recognize you, and I think we have a video that we can show your on a visual aspect your 6-year journey here at Valley Metro.
Before we get there, let me talk to the calendars. I'm sorry. That's my calendar going forward for April and May. Here's your calendar. And I'll let you read that. There you go. Yours is a little bit fuller than mine is.
Thank you. I think, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. In addition, we do have a small token of appreciation from the board. With I'll read the message that has on the picture, on the frame. On behalf of the Valley Metro Boards of Directors, past and present, we thank you for your 6 years of public service to building and advocating for our regional transit system. You are a vocal champion for public transportation and its positive impact on our quality of life. Transit in Metro Phoenix is better thanks to your service, creativity, and passion. Congratulations on your retirement, and we wish you the best in the chapters ahead. So I'll take it with. And if it's okay, we'll take a picture here. Thank you, Scott. I don't know if folks have any words. I know we talked last week, but we do have additional items. I don't know how we finish the agenda here, but we do have additional items. But if anybody else that want to comment before we move on, or
Chair, I have a comment.
go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Well, I think, Scott, the thank you is to all the staff that was able to bring the dollars in, because it takes a heavy lift. But you were the leader of it. What I have to say is that light rail wouldn't exist today if it hadn't been for the voters and the cities coming together, but for one main man that brought light rail to the city of Phoenix. And that person is no longer with us. And it is a glory to see how the expansion is happening, because he particularly wanted South Phoenix. And South Phoenix is, in particular, my piece, even though I don't represent it, is the area that impacts our community the most, and small businesses. And I have to say that we wouldn't be sitting here if he hadn't done that heavy lift. In addition to that, I just want to say thank you. I may be an emotional woman or a hysterical woman, but most importantly, I'm really a spicy Latina. And with my spice, you will get the bite. So wish you the best, hope for the best, and thank you.
Thank you.
Through the chair.
Mayor Harkey?
Yeah, and I think there might be a couple others with hands raised online too. I think I saw. Scott, I just want to thank you. You were certainly the right man for the right time. And I really appreciate you stepping in at a very uncertain and certainly I'll say scandalous time in the life of Valley Metro and RPTA. I really thank you for that. I know that our paths will cross somewhere. I could continue to go on, but I'll just close by saying, look forward to engaging with you on the next, whatever that is. And heartfelt, thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. We have Supervisor Sellers.
Yeah, I just personally want to thank Scott for all he's done. He, as Mayor Hartnett just mentioned, he entered Valley Metro at a very trying time. I can't imagine anybody who would have handled it better and more professionally than Scott did. And I think it's so significant that he was not looking for a job. He didn't do this because he was looking for a job. He just did this because we approached him and said, can you help us out? And what we thought was going to be a brief period of time to help us turn into 6 years plus. But I can't imagine anyone who could have accomplished more and done more for our region than Scott has. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Supervisor. Very kind.
Thank you. If no other comments, we'll move forward with our agenda. With item number 3, Audit and Finance Subcommittee update, Councilmember Stitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will again try to be brief. We had a great meeting last month. We talked about our contract management, federal government consulting services audit, which was a special request to the board based on discussions that we had last fall about our contract increase. That was fully audited. The board policy that was put in place following that event really came through as a kind of a preemptive solution to a number of the problems that were identified in that audit. So Valley Metro has positioned itself very well following that situation. The second item was the contract change orders, first review. That is something that the audit staff is going through on a continuous basis. We had that update. That is contained in the minutes for this meeting as well. The internal audit update, things are progressing well. The audit staff has been plagued with some COVID issues among their staff. So things have slowed for the time being, but appear to be headed back in the right direction. One of the things in the budget that you will see from internal audit is a request for an additional auditor to look at an IT specific related auditor, which seemed to have some support from the Audit and Finance Subcommittee moving forward. So we'll hear more about that as the budget progresses. But other than that, the rest of the meeting is contained in the minutes, which are in this packet, and pending any questions, that ends my report.
Perfect. Any other questions, comments? Audit and Finance updates? Hearing none. Move on to item number 4, minutes. Minutes from the February 17th, 2022 joint board meeting are presented for approval. Request a motion and a second.
So move approval of minutes.
Vice Mayor Pastor.
Second.
Second, our Councilmember Arredondo Savage. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
Aye.
Hearing none, ayes have it. Item number 5, the Enterprise Resource Planning, Enterprise Resource Management Contract Authority increase. I'll pass it over to Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll pass it to Jim Hilliard to give a very brief presentation and answer any questions you might have on this item.
Very brief. Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Stitt had asked at the AFS meeting that we pull this off a consent agenda, in part because it serves as an example of some of the work that AFS has been doing to improve our reporting of needs for changes in contract authority in the wake of the issue regarding our federal lobbying contract. And so I'll quickly just summarize the issue, but then also lean in a little bit to how it's an example of the changes that we've made in that reporting to make sure that the board is apprised of what's changing and why. So the issue here is in 2020, the board approved about a $7 million contract for Valley Metro to implement a new enterprise resource planning system that's accounting, procurement, and budgeting, and an integrated enterprise resource management system, which is capturing data about all of the various pieces that are being maintained in our system, the cost of their maintenance, so that we can really drill into what's the most effective maintenance cycle and when should we be replacing things and what's the way to minimize the costs of assets and maximize their lifespans. And so that project has been ongoing. The budget account and accounting components of that and procurement components were completed last June. The two toughest parts of the project were payroll implementation and the enterprise asset management components. Those have both needed to be delayed. The EAM component, because we found out we just got a whole lot more assets than we thought we did. And so when we were originally planning for all the data entry, enter all those assets, we thought it was going to take less time than it has. And therefore, that component of the project is being delayed until this September. The payroll component was a combination of, it was harder than we thought it was, and staff just getting sick. We've only got 3 members of our payroll team. Our current payroll process is very, very manual. And so anytime you're taking a manual process and automating, it's kind of hard because stuff comes out of the woodwork. You're not just converting from automated to automated. So we've had a whole bunch of stuff came out of the woodwork, like, for example, our current payroll provider, ADP, when an employee quits for any reason, they just delete all their back data. So as we've been going back into the system to try to recreate payroll files to know that, to test to know that the calculations are right, none of those past employees are there. And so then we have to go back and manually add them, manually add their benefits, et cetera. And so that's taken longer than we thought. In addition, 2 of the 3 members of the payroll team either had COVID or were in the hospital during the course of the critical period of the implementation. They simply couldn't be there to do the testing and what work that needed to be done. So payroll was originally scheduled to go live December 1. The document that TMC RMC saw had that pushing out to the end of April. However, we just got a call last week from Oracle, the provider of the system, and they said, oh, you know that programming change that you guys needed for payroll to go live? That's not going to be ready until the fall. So we're basically putting the payroll implementation on hold for the next couple of months. We'll pick it back up when Oracle's done with the programming, and our new go live date is probably December. That doesn't actually change the cost of the change that you have in front of you, because we're just pausing the work. So we simply won't expend those hours until we pick it back up. There is kind of an advantage there, because one of the challenges in payroll is if you don't do it at the beginning of a tax year, then you've got to convert in all the payroll tax information on the back end, and that's kind of expensive. And so by picking this back up in the fall and going live at the end of the year, we want the use of contracts. And so, and this is also a perfect example of how there are times when we will know that a contract and its authority needs to be changed, but we won't yet know what that change should be. So we knew we weren't going to make the December go live in mid-December, but it actually took us until February to get a number from the contractor on what's the cost of the push out. So our new process to account for those kinds of things is we're providing you a monthly report, and any contract that we believe has the potential to need an adjustment in its authority, or we know it's going to need an adjustment authority, it'll be on that report. That report will include sort of when we became aware of what happened, what we're doing about what happened, and then when we think we'll be able to be ready to bring it to you for the board for action in cases where we're not quite ready yet because maybe we don't know what the new number is. And so this is kind of a perfect example of that. And in fact, that new report will be coming out for the first time in the April board cycle. And this will still be on it, because in spite of this change, one of the things we found in the process of implementing payroll was that the rules that we told our contractor we wanted to follow for things like shift differential, it's the way we currently handle it. We're creating a whole bunch of additional complexity in the scheduling for the new system that was going to require a bunch of administrative work on the part of managers every time somebody's covering for somebody else. And so we've said to them, we want to go back and strip out those complex rules. Just pay shift diff if you're working during a time when shift diff is authorized. Let the time on the clock determine whether you get it, not these complex rules about how much of this shift and how much of that shift. And they've said, great, we can do that, but that's not free. We'll have to come back and revise that. So you'll see this very contract on the April report. We don't yet have a number for what it's going to cost to strip out those rules. I don't expect it to be huge, and it'll be much less than the amount of time that managers are spending, administratively moving people from one shift to another when with the simpler rules they won't have to. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I hope that helped.
Any questions, comments? Councilmember Stipp.
I do want to thank Jim for putting this through. This was originally put on the consent agenda, but because it was the first contract of this nature that fall under the new set of rules and the almost $500,000 expenditure, I thought it was important that the whole board hear it. So Jim, thank you for the extra work.
Any other comments, questions? Is that Mayor Harkey has a question? Mayor Harkey, do you have a question, or is that left?
Sorry, I
over
think
for-
it's left it up from earlier. My bad.
All right, perfect. Well, if no other further questions, request a motion and a second to authorize the CEO to increase the contract expenditure authority for the ERP-EAM system implementation contract with Denovo Ventures LLC by $423,000.
So move.
Vice Mayor Pastor.
Second.
Second, Councilmember Stipp. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. Thank you. Item number 6, proposed fare policy change streetcar. Pass it over to Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is sort of a happy action because we're doing this due to the impending opening of the Tempe streetcar. We have a fare policy that applies region-wide to all of our modes of transportation. And since our current policy does not specifically address a streetcar, we need to come to the board for your approval of an amendment to our existing fare policy that will bring the streetcar into the system. So we have both Tyler Olson, who you know well, and Jordan Brackett, who you may or may not know well. Jordan is our community outreach manager and does an amazing job in working under Hillary Fuss's group to connect with the communities. So I'll turn it over to Tyler.
Good afternoon, Chair Heredia, members of the Joint Committee or Joint Boards. I'll provide a brief background on our current regional fare collection system modernization project, and then turn it over to Jordan for all the important work that her and her outreach team have done for this project. All right, so over the last several years, still can't figure out where to point this, sorry. We've worked in collaboration with City of Phoenix, your member cities through Fare Policy Working Group to really identify goals of the new system. I won't go through each one of these due to time, but really we wanted to improve fare media control functionality for our customers. It's all about the rider. Offer innovative features such as mobile ticketing, fare capping, in which the rider saves money as they tap. With these goals in mind, we're going to eliminate paper passes, reduce the cost of fare media in the system today, and really have a true point of sale control of our reduced fare so that we won't be selling passes at a discount for those that aren't eligible. With the new fare collection system, it's really new fare technology. It's all account-based, so really allowing customers the benefit of registering their accounts, managing them better through websites. They can also deactivate their cards should they be lost or stolen so that people can't use their cards. We're also getting new hardware, so new validators on board all of the fleet, and then ticket vending machines, replacing all of the existing and adding some new ones. New fare channels that I mentioned, mobile ticketing, the retail outlet, essentially we're moving to a J-hook model. That means when you go to Circle K, you'll see Starbucks card, you'll see a Valley Metro card. You can grab that card, add value, and tap your way across the system. When it comes to the phasing, there's two main phases. The first phase, validators are installed on all the bus fleet and rail station. That really sets up the infrastructure for phase two, but also allows the launch of the mobile app. So essentially, we're looking at that at December of 22, prior to the Super Bowl. And then in phase two, that's really when we release the reloadable smart card to the entire region. All customers launch the retail network. TVMs will be in place, and newly added, which we're excited about, are new fare boxes. So with the new fare collection system, it's our opportunity to update the policy as we move through these phases. Of course, the streetcar opening next month, we're really excited about that. You know, that will be the first phase that we need to add to this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan Brackett for the outreach info.
All the papers. Thank you, Tyler. All right. I am going to try to move very quickly. I know time is short. So as Tyler and Scott introed, we've been doing some outreach for the Tempe Streetcar fare policy changes. We were doing it now. Obviously, there's several changes that will happen with the fare policy and the new fare collection system. Much of that will happen later this year when we get ready to implement phase one, but we wanted to go ahead and do the Tempe Streetcar fare policy change outreach now before it enters operations. And so once it is in operations, we can really focus on educating folks about how to use it, and safety around the streetcar is a huge element of our communications. On the screen here, you can see that we are proposing a $1 for a full fare single ride, as well as 50 cents for a reduced fare single ride. Just kind of setting the groundwork here. This information was shared with the community as part of the outreach. Oh no, not me too. Okay, there we go. I will, again, I'll keep moving very quickly here. As part of our outreach, we had two federally mandated requirements as part of the outreach elements that we were pursuing. So one of them was a public hearing that allowed it for ADA as well as limited English proficiency audiences, as well as a full 30-day comment period. We actually had a comment period open for almost 2 months, so we were able to gather as much input as we possibly could on this new mode. As part of our outreach, we did quite a mix of in-person and digital tactics. For example, we did a virtual public hearing, which was recorded, and then the survey was available for several weeks. We had in-person intercept surveys along our light rail alignment, and hosted by our customer experience coordinators that pointed people to a website survey that was available kind of as a self-serve kind of opportunity. We also promoted that website survey through targeted social media advertisements, our social media channels, email promotions, et cetera. This detailed data is in your packet as our outreach summary, so I'll just skip to kind of the highlights since we are short on time. In summary, the data is really indicating that riders and potential riders both are likely to use the streetcar regardless of whether there's a fare or not. When asked specifically about the proposed fares, 40% of respondents indicated that the fare would have no impact on their use of streetcar. Up to 2 in 10 respondents indicated they may be less likely to ride, but overall, 1/3 of all respondents said they were more likely to use the new mode. That does conclude our brief presentation, trying to keep things moving. If you have any questions, I'm happy to deep dive on any of the data. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for the information. Any questions, comments? Hearing none. This is, it is requested for action on the agenda. So request a motion and second to forward to the boards of directors authorization to amend the regional fare policy to include a fare structure for streetcar.
Thank you, Chair. Really quick. And Jordan, I just want to say thank you. That was really short and abbreviated, but I just want you guys to know you and Tyler have done a lot of really great work. So we are very grateful for that. And also grateful for the opportunity to offer the free service for a while, like a year, like we agreed to. So I think that'll be really good for the new riders to get excited and to just create some really good habits. And we're looking forward to the opening, and hopefully it all goes smoothly next month. So with that, I'd like to move approval.
Perfect. Second?
Second.
Second, Vice Mayor Pastor. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any nays? Ayes have it. Thank you, everybody. Item number 7, South Central Extension Downtown Hub Track Connections and Single Tracking. Pass over to Mr. Scott Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we've gone a long time, but this is extremely important because in just 2 or 3 short weeks, there's going to be big changes in downtown Phoenix and in our rail operations that will also impact bus operations. So turn over to our project manager, Luis Mota, who will move on.
All right, good afternoon. Mine's easy, it's informational. So we're here to talk about that, as Scott just mentioned. So a quick highlight of I got to figure out the buttons here. Okay. The agenda today, don't need to go into that in detail, but you'll get it as we go through it in the interest of time. Quick project overview. I don't know where to point this thing. Okay, so everybody probably already knows 5.5-mile extension, taking light rail down from the heart of Phoenix down to South Central community. There's a key element to this project that's the downtown hub. The installation of the downtown hub is a major step for us for 2 reasons. Is one, it accommodates extension to the south, and secondly, it creates a transfer point in a very critical area. Currently, our light rail changes direction in downtown. After this downtown hub in the future, we'll be able to operate as a more mature 2-line system with an east-west, a north-south, a transfer point that I just mentioned, and the ability to expand westward. Overall, to facilitate this new 2-line system requires installation of 19 new pieces of special track work, which is track work that allows us to interface with the existing track. And these are the general locations for that track work. The first 6 locations have already been taken care of. Most of that was done last February and March of 2021. And we're in the process of integrating and preparing to activate those crossover loops. The remaining locations require a significant amount of work. It does affect the light rail in the heart of downtown. And it's not just the installation of the new pieces of special track work that I discussed. It's a web of conduits, systems work, and track reconstruction. So that's the reason we're here today. So zooming into the downtown hub, you can see the yellow is our existing alignment. Green is the new track work. The neon green are the special track locations for this work. And what's not shown here is the over 1,000 feet of track reconstruction and the other items that I just mentioned. Okay, so similar to prior single tracking work, we're required to do this work, we're required to close sections of track. And what that means is the track is shared for both directions. Each train has to wait for the other train to traverse the area before he can go through. So what that means is that our headway schedules are dependent on our nearest crossover loops. The current configuration, the way we are now, and as we did last February and March, we're able to, by using Culver and 11th Street, we were able to schedule 30-minute headways. When we activate the new loops at McKinley and 5th, okay, there you go. We can reliably accommodate, what's going on here? Am I not doing this right? All right. With the two new loops, as you can see, they're closer. We can reliably accommodate 20-minute headways. So that's a significant improvement. All right. I'm going to go through this one quicker. The Candy Cane area is our first portion of work at Central and Washington. That's going to close that track. And then for the next portion, we'll flip tracks. This is where we run. Here. Okay, so we switch tracks over. And then we start the next work. There's a second phase where we start on Jefferson between First Avenue and Central, and then we work our way over to do the work on Washington and First Avenue. So unfortunately, due to the size of the work areas, there will be traffic, significant roadway restrictions and traffic impacts. So the detours for this traffic control are going to change with the work. And they come in about 3 general phases. The first phase shown here to do the work at Washington between First Street and Central shows the general traffic routes. And then phase 2 is broken into 2 areas. First, we start at Jefferson Street, as I mentioned, between First Avenue and Central. The key to this is trying to send traffic that is going through, around, but providing the wayfinding and access so they can get through there. And once we have, with the phase 2, once we're able to get a lane through on southbound on First Avenue, then we can do the work at First Avenue and Washington and restrict Washington at that location. So we've been going through, these are the general slides we reviewed with the stakeholders. We've gone through in a lot more detail. We don't have the time to do that here today, but unfortunately, I just can give you just the big picture. What I want to talk about more importantly is the schedule. The schedule, the big thing is there's 3 key elements that impact when we do this work. The first is the ability to use the new crossover loops that I showed you at McKinley and 5th Street. And the second item relates to that as well because it's procurement of that special track work. There's a lot of big companies out there, a lot of railroads that order a lot of track. So for Valley Metro being one of the small fish in that order, it takes a long time to get those pieces of track out. It takes 18 months, and that doesn't include the engineering that goes ahead of time. So we had to get McKinley and 5th first, and then get in line for the rest of it. So we're pinned in the front, and that takes a couple years worth of work to do. On the backside is we're trying to hurry up and get this done ahead of the Super Bowl milestones at the end of the year so downtown can look clean. And so where the schedule ended up landing is the items in green and purple we've already done, but this work that I described today starts on April 16th and runs all the way through July 2nd. The work will be continuous. It will be day and night. We've scheduled it so that the loudest part of the work, such as saw cutting, demo work, that part happens during the day. And so with that, I wanted to hand it over to Madeline to talk about some of the communication efforts that we've done.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Madeline Phipps from our communications team. Just really briefly, our main communication to riders is letting them know about the 20-minute schedule adjustment. So beginning Monday, we have a website ready to go, social media, a lot of other digital communications through newsletters. We'll be using traditional media outlets and also, physical communications, signage at our rail stations. Our customer experience coordinators will be throughout the system letting riders know what to to expect. And then also for all of our downtown stakeholders who are most impacted by the actual construction work, our teams have been meeting with them for a few weeks now directly to explain what's going to happen, what they can expect. Those meetings will continue, just making sure that everyone who's coming to the downtown area or who works in the downtown area is well aware of how they might have to adjust their travel plans. I think that's everything unless anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I'd just like to add one thing. We've been working with City of Phoenix staff for 2 years because this obviously affects the flow of bus, express bus, local bus, and in conjunction with the central station construction, which just finally got going in the last month or two. So a lot of the changes related to the bus routes were implemented, October of 2019? So almost 2 years ago. So we've been way in advance of that. And we work closely with City of Phoenix staff to make sure that there wasn't a sudden change in the bus. But your constituents, everybody will be affected because it does affect access to downtown, especially express routes. And it will affect all of you if you decide to come to any event in downtown for the next, between April 16th and July 22nd, it's going to be a mess. Take light rail or stay away. Don't stay away, just plan ahead, right, Vice Mayor? Yeah. Come in and support these businesses. Eat.
We've been through that.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Leslie.
Since I'm hearing from businesses on some of the labor that's going on and the noise, either what have you done or what are you planning to do with those businesses that are constantly being affected by this?
Yeah. So for the noise, it took a big effort to organize this. This is not done in typical fashion. Typically for the other cut-in areas, we've done the pre-demo, and that pre-demo has to happen at night when we can single track. In this case, because of the area and the complaints that we've had, we restructured the schedule to make sure, and that's what I mentioned, is like we're doing that loud work during the day, the night work. There will still be construction at night, but the items that we received complaints about were the saw cutting, jackhammering, removal of the hardscape materials, that sort of work. We revised the schedule to make sure that that's only happening in the day. Again, it does affect our overall schedule. This is a little bit longer than typical, but we were able to get that done.
And where notices, is there enough notice for, I would say, 2 weeks in advance, notifying the businesses regarding this? Because one of the complaints was they weren't notified in time. And if they would have known, then they would have asked staff to work from home in the day.
Yeah. So there's been plenty of communication that started the last couple of weeks regarding the upcoming work, the impacts, where exactly walking through, not just the noise, but access. All right.
Help you out a little bit. Yeah, so our team has started about 3 or 4 weeks ago, reaching out to various stakeholders in the downtown. We're actually kind of doing a little bit of a tiered approach, which is probably too much detail, but we're starting with the folks directly adjacent to the work and kind of working our way out. So we'll be eventually canvassing everyone in the area between the sevens and, that main kind of core of the downtown. So we're doing a whole mix of in-person notifications, open houses, canvassing, phone calls. I mean, we're really just trying to, the impacts of this work cannot be understated, and we are making sure that everyone knows exactly what's going on. Already had a couple of really great meetings with a couple of the key stakeholders in the downtown area about ways that we can help them, particularly with egress and ingress from their parking garages. So there's already been lots of great conversation. We have tons more work to do, lots of communications going on, but very thorough plan right now.
Okay, and I'm assuming you're working with DPI.
Yes, and actually Downtown Phoenix Incorporated has been just absolutely instrumental in helping us kind of gain a platform. We're actually speaking at 3 of their different meetings to help folks understand what's going on. They've been a wonderful partner to us.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, comments? Perfect. This item is for information only, so thank you for the information presented today. So move on to item number 8, travel expenditures and solicitations. This item is for presented for information only. Any questions? Hearing none. Item number 9, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. Any members have anything? Hearing none. Perfect. Next meeting, scheduled for Thursday, April 21st. We'll move on to our next agenda, Valley Metro RPTA. Item number one, public comment. We have one person, Mr. Bruce Crowley. You have 3 minutes.
In your cities. Surprise, do you have Bell Road? Because it stops at Arrowhead Mall. And then is there nobody living or that would need or facilitating that? But is it the attitude of each of your communities? Because I wrote this thing back in the 80s. The board didn't feel it was important enough to deal with it until the 2000s, 25 years after we had planned it. But it was that each of you were also supposed to be getting the job done. Mesa, do you know that 60% of your community has 0 bus? And that you're going to be putting that streetcar all the way to your baseball facility, but do you have a bus on that route now? Did you have it 10 years ago? Has it been brought to your attention more than once, as in with Mr. Smith and yourself? I pointed out that if you are trying to use the county's animal care facility there, you can't get there by bus. What road needs to get it? Oh, Rio Salado. But do we do that? Where is the planning? One of the compliments I got to give Mr. Smith is under your auspices, we now have no bus book. Saves you guys money, but what does that do for the citizenry? Does customer service work all the time that the system is in operation? Doesn't. Why don't you have that? Especially since now you're going to say that the way you find out when the bus is going to be there and what's going to be happening is through customer service. Where is the planning for any one of your communities? All 19 of you have been making the bus more efficient and effective and used in your communities. When are you going to be going to a vote? Any of you? There's no plan. When I see that you went and spent $130 million on a rail project, supposedly there's going to be a $2 billion project for the bus because of the amount of money spent. I don't see millions being spent on the bus ever. All I see is, well, we're going to do the rail. And like I said before, when they're doing the rail, where is the multimodal when you have 5 stops going on the west side, when you've got 3 stops on with what you got already as in 16th Street, et cetera. Please start doing the planning. Get me my buses and the people able to use it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. We'll move on to item number 2, consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented for action. I'll ask any board members if they have any questions or comments on the consent agenda. Hearing none, request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
So moving the consent agenda.
Second.
Vice Mayor Pastor, Councilmember Arredondo Savage, second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Hearing none, ayes have it. Thank you. Item number 3, report on current events and suggested agenda items. Any events, reports, comments? Hearing none. Next meeting is again Thursday, April 21st. And thank you, everybody. We have one more for those on the rail agenda, rail meeting. Stick with us. We'll start maybe in 2 minutes. Oh, we're going to go ahead? Okay. All right. For those on the Metro Rail, we'll get started. we'll start with item number 1, public comments. We have Mr. Blue Crowley. Go ahead, Blue. Yeah, 3 minutes.
Well, during your study session, it had a thing in there and it says for rail only, and it's item number 34. It's the streetcar operations. And the paragraph is, a streetcar is scheduled to begin operations in Tempe in late 2022. As a result, full funding must be included for fiscal year 2023 budget. Next line, blah, blah, blah. Just a thought, y'all, it is an official document, and you did say that comments were in blue because I do that. Well, if you're going to be putting the comments in, at least have a little more sensibility about it. As I have stated with the rail, where are your multimodal developments within the system? When you're building the damn thing, why don't you understand that if a bus route crosses it, you're gonna need to have it blended? I mean, how hard is it? When I continually see how much funding is going to the rail, and supposedly there is not only an equal amount, but an exorbitant amount more. It's a 60-40 split. Where is that 40 or 60% of your funding doing the bus? Like I said, over the last how many years since Mr. Smith said that the board and that agreed that all the planning and showing that we were going to be expanding into got flushed because there was a $2 billion shortfall. Well, continuously through that, does that mean that that was status quo and that's all you're going to be doing with the bus, that you're not expanding it, you're not making it for the region? Because all I see is, well, we're going to be doing this thing downtown of changing the routes around, and we're going to be building out to the West Valley. Like I said, on that West Valley extension, on all the extensions you're doing, why is it so that you can't conceive that it needs to be multimodal and that bus isn't the abandoned stepchild? I'll give you back 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Move on to item number 2, the consent agenda presented for action. Ask any board members if they have any questions or comments. Hearing none, request a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda.
Vice Mayor Pastor, Councilmember Arredondo Savage. A second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no nays. Any nays? Ayes have it. Thank you. Item number 3, report on current events. Any members have any info on this item? Hearing none. We conclude this meeting. Next meeting Thursday, April 21st. And that fulfills the last meeting with Mr. Scott Smith. Thank you, Scott.